My name is Mary, a 35-year-old employee. I was born with a weak constitution, often catching colds and missing school. Perhaps due to this, I didn't have many close friends. Even in middle school, my frailty didn't change. Classmates who didn't like this often approached me, saying, "Hey, you're supposedly sick and missing school, but in reality, you just want to play hooky, right? It must be nice having it so easy. We can't take off because our parents are strict." Honestly, I was envious. Being spoken ill of like that was a usual occurrence. I often came back home feeling hurt and wounded by the heartless words of my classmates. I felt as if there was an invisible wall between me and my classmates, making my middle school days particularly difficult. As an adult, I couldn't easily miss work for a minor fever, so I always put work first, even if it meant pushing myself. Especially as a new employee, my training supervisor was extremely stern. He constantly said things like, "Illness comes from the mind, show some spirit." So keeping up with it was quite a struggle. As my days were consumed by work, I noticed my peers getting married and becoming happy. It made me realize that I was reaching that age too. However, I never felt a rush to get married. I believed I would never find a kind person who would want to marry someone with my health issues. But life is unpredictable, and unexpectedly, a man who invited me out for a meal appeared out of the blue. This person is my husband, Thomas. "Hey, looks like you're finishing up for the day, right? If it's all right with you, would you like to grab dinner together?" Thomas was an elite, a graduate of a prestigious university, and was considered a future head of the department. He was not only competent at work but also cooperative and trusted by everyone around him. He had a personality completely opposite to my introverted one. I was surprised when he suddenly invited me to dinner. At first, I didn't even realize he was talking to me and thought he must have mistaken me for someone else. However, it seemed he was indeed inviting me, which even left me blurting out, "Ha!" Thomas was quite popular with the female employees because of his personality and good looks. It was a mystery to me why he was still single. Yes, I'm almost done with my work, so that would be fine." In the end, I couldn't refuse his invitation, so I went along for dinner. But this meal became the catalyst for the two of us to grow close quickly. He was very friendly, and the conversation flowed naturally. It was the first time in a long time I had been able to laugh and talk with someone other than family. Although I had to head home because of work the next day, I found myself wishing I could spend more time with him. We started spending more time together after that meal, and 3 months later, we began dating. Considering our ages, we decided to marry. A year after we started dating, we found a small apartment near the train station and moved in together. I never imagined I'd get married and truly believed I was about to start a happy life. I never expected this marriage to be the beginning of a nightmare. Shortly after getting married, he gradually began to reveal his true nature. After our marriage, I switched jobs and started working at a different company. It was a company with many female employees. During the interview, when I mentioned my health issues, they reassured me that with so many women working there, I shouldn't worry. Today, I was able to take a day off due to their understanding. "Hey, why are you sleeping? The head of the household is back. Shouldn't you welcome me home? You're so dumb." As soon as I got home, he came into the room with a sulky face, seemingly displeased that I hadn't greeted him. "I'm sorry. I was feeling unwell today and took the day off from work. I'm about to make dinner. Why don't you go take a bath first?" Upon hearing these words, Thomas, who was already in a bad mood, said, "Ha! You're just starting to make dinner now? When a husband comes home, it's obvious that dinner should be ready. Are you lying about being sick just because you want to skip household chores? You're such an incorrigible woman." His words reminded me of what my classmates used to say to me back in my school days. They would often say I was skipping class under the guise of being sick. Their words would always hurt my heart, but even when I was feeling sick, Thomas never helped with the chores. Instead, he treated me like a housemaid. Then one day, a certain incident happened. I felt particularly bad that day, with a fever exceeding 104 degrees and dizzy to the point where I couldn't even stand up. Ideally, Thomas should have taken me to the hospital, but instead, he grabbed his carry-on bag and walked straight out the front door without a glance at me. "Wait a minute, you're leaving me in this condition?" Shocked by his indifference, I couldn't help but shout, "It can't be helped. It was planned from before. Take care of the rest." With that, he really left the house. About 30 minutes after he left, my condition worsened. I called an ambulance myself and was taken to the hospital. My parents and my brother came rushing to the hospital as soon as they heard the news. While receiving an IV, I explained everything that had happened so far. As I spoke, both my parents' and brother's faces turned red. Leaving his sick wife behind to go on a trip, this behavior was unacceptable not only to my parents but also to me. That's why I decided to carry out a certain plan with my parents and brother. I did text him that I was hospitalized, and soon after, I got a message from Thomas. I'm about to head home, so I called the house, but no answer. Are you still in the hospital? Come home and cook my dinner. Seeing this message, my brother decided to call Thomas. Surprised by the sudden call from my brother from my phone, Thomas assumed it was me and started talking arrogantly. However, when he realized it was my brother, he immediately changed his tone and started apologizing. But it was too late. With a low, angry voice, my brother said to him, "Sorry to inform you, but Mary won't be coming back to that house. She passed away." What? Even Thomas couldn't hide his surprise at the shocking words that suddenly came out of my brother's mouth. However, he soon regained his composure and said with a nonchalant tone, "I see. Understood. Once things settle down, I'll take care of the necessary procedures. Thank you for everything till now," and with that, he hung up the phone. Wouldn't most people, upon hearing their wife had passed away while traveling, rush home in a panic? Yet he, far from showing concern, hasn't even asked about the funeral schedule. In other words, he couldn't care less about me. After that, I felt something snap within me. From then on, I decided to carry out a plan that my brother had devised while he was at work. I returned home. I deliberately cleaned up the messy room until it sparkled, folded the laundry that had been hung up, and put away the dishes, taking great care not to drop a single speck of dust. During that time, I checked things like the drains and toothbrushes. After doing this a few times, my brother received a call from him. "Hey, it's rare for you to call. What's up?" Although he spoke calmly, my brother's eyes were smiling. He probably knew he would get a call. Unaware of this, he said over the phone, Can I ask you something? Did you go into my room while I was out?" "Into your room? No, I didn't go in. Why would you ask that?" Perhaps even he, as insensitive as he is, found it eerie that the room was constantly sparkling clean, so he thought my brother was entering the room and called to confirm. The thing is, the room that was messy until this morning is incredibly clean. When I returned home, the trash on the floor was thrown away, the laundry is folded. Something is weird. "Did you come to pick up Mary's stuff?" Speaking with a tremor in his voice, my brother replied, "Oh, come on, there's no way I'd do that. I never got a spare key to your room for my sister when she was alive, and our mom has been too busy with work lately to visit you there, Thomas. You must be tired to think this way." Although it was my brother who planned it, I was the one carrying it out. Even for my brother, it was impossible to enter the room without permission. Therefore, in legal terms, it's still me, his wife, who was doing this. I, who was listening to the conversation next door, had a hard time not bursting out laughing. If your room was ransacked, I could understand. But it's clean. Is there a problem with that? No, that's not it. It seemed he had something he didn't want to say. My husband fell silent. A few days later, there was another call from him to my brother's cell phone. Apparently, strange things continued to happen after that, so he consulted with the police. However, the police officer did not take his story seriously. Because if things were missing, they could understand. But when he explained that the rooms were sparkling clean, the laundry was folded, they laughed and said, "Are you living alone? Maybe your mom came from your family home and cleaned up your room, or did you forget that you cleaned up while you were drunk? Anyway, since nothing is missing, you should be grateful." That's unfortunate, but as the police officer said, nothing is missing. That's a good thing, right? Maybe Mary's spirit is lingering in your room, cleaning it up while you're away. Upon saying this, he seemed to take it seriously and hung up with a trembling voice. Eventually, considering the potential nuisance to others, I decided to reveal myself to my husband. One day, timing it perfectly with my husband Thomas's return, I entered the room to find him asleep on the sofa, his face flushed red. He might have come back from a drinking party, or maybe the alcohol helped him sleep better. The table and floor were strewn with cans of beer. It seemed like he had fallen asleep in his drunken stupor. Seeing him fast asleep and snoring, I decided to carry out a special surprise. I had in mind, what's going on? Thomas suddenly jumped as the light, which he thought had been turned off, suddenly switched on. Seeing me, whom he believed had passed away based on the information from my brother, he let out a gasp. Ariel, a ghost, an adult man, saw me and immediately yelled that I was a ghost, tears welling up in his eyes as he stared at me. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I didn't attend the funeral. I promised to pray for you, so please rest in peace. He mumbled these words while putting his hands together, trembling. Look carefully. I've got legs, right? I'm not a ghost, I'm very much alive. Confirming the existence of my legs, he turned red with anger, this time glaring at me with a terrifying expression. What the hell do you think you're doing? Do you think this is acceptable? Plus, you've even involved my parents. Unforgivable. I'll take legal action against you for this. Yes, against the outburst. I was about to execute the real surprise. Suddenly, my mother, who had been waiting outside the entrance, went to call someone. The moment he saw the person, Thomas, who had been red with anger just a moment ago, turned pale and began to sweat profusely. What's wrong? You're pale and sweating. Are you feeling unwell? Maybe you should go to the hospital. It was understandable why his complexion was poor, because the person standing in front of him was someone he had recently traveled with. It was the woman with whom he had had an affair. In reality, my brother, suspecting Thomas's infidelity, had been talking to a friend who worked in the same company since I left the job. Thomas had been getting along well with a woman named Natalie who worked at the reception of the same company. It seemed as if they were just friendly colleagues, but multiple employees had witnessed the two of them getting cozy in the break room, and rumors circulated in the company that the two might be dating. Many employees knew that he was married to me, so they immediately realized that their relationship was something more than just friendship. His good friends were torn between reporting this to me and the boss. They were hesitant because they were worried about me, who had always been weak, and how I might fall sick from the shock. Hearing this, the woman bowed her head and bit her lip, unbearably embarrassed. Thomas, feeling embarrassed, called his mother to explain the situation. In response, his furious mother shouted at us with a ferocious tone. What is this? Being my son like this, I've always disliked you. Despite not graduating from a prestigious university, you are so arrogant. On top of that, you all tricked my son and hurt him, which is unforgivable. I'll make sure you divorce. There will be no alimony. Whether it was because she had been shouting or not, she was taking heavy breaths, her shoulders heaving up and down. Of course, if she didn't know the situation, it was only natural for her to be upset, thinking we were bullying Thomas one-sidedly. However, my father spoke calmly, explaining the whole situation to my fuming stepmother. The first time she heard this, she had a look on her face that said she could hardly believe it. When he explained that her son had abandoned his wife, who was suffering from poor health, to go out with his mistress who was in the room, it seemed she finally noticed the presence of this mistress. Her previous bluster was gone, and she was simply shaken. The woman, feeling completely uncomfortable, bowed her head in apology to us. I am so sorry. I will fully pay you damages. Please forgive me. Unlike her flustered boyfriend and dazed mother-in-law, the woman bowed deeply and apologized. I had her write a promissory note on the spot. When I told her I would consult a lawyer at a later date, she responded in a frail voice, "Understood." I couldn't possibly forgive someone who had done this to me. I showed him the filled-out divorce papers and said, I can't possibly forgive you for this. I'm going to consult a lawyer about everything that's happened. After that, I divorced him. Because he didn't come to my aid when I was ill, I ended up receiving a significant amount of money. With that money, I rented a small apartment and have been commuting to work from there. The office is still full of talks about the two of them, but I don't know if it's because he's thick-skinned or what, but he continues to work as if nothing has happened. Hearing about that doesn't make me feel anything. If anything, I think, so that's what kind of man he was. I decided to try and forget about this as soon as possible and threw myself into my work even more than before. Even with difficult tasks, I worked hard to understand them while asking my boss, and it seems that my efforts were recognized as I was chosen for a 1-year overseas assignment. I am already fluent in English, so I won't have any trouble living abroad. Just as I was getting excited about my overseas assignment, I suddenly started getting repeated calls from an unknown number. Since it was an unknown number, I initially thought it was a wrong number, but since it kept calling over and over again, I thought it might be someone I know, and I answered the call. Hello? Who is this? When I cautiously asked, it turned out to be Thomas. It's been a while, Mary. Have you been well? I just wanted to hear your voice and ended up calling. Unbelievable. He called me casually after what happened. I wonder what he could think of me. The more I heard his voice, the angrier I became. What do you want now? I have nothing to discuss with you. After this call, never contact me again. Then he started talking with a desperate voice. Wait, just listen to me for a second. Actually, I married Natalie, but she doesn't do any housework at all. Since we got married, she doesn't clean at all, and all we eat are pre-made meals. On top of that, I've started to have to take care of my mother. Honestly, I'm in trouble. Although she looked beautiful and neat, in reality, she didn't do any housework. All the meals were grab-and-go food or ready-made meals, and she didn't clean, so the floor was covered in dust. On top of everything, he had to begin to take care of his mother, and in desperation, he turned to me for help. I couldn't help but let out a heavy sigh over the phone, and I felt more certain than ever that breaking up had been the right choice. I'm sorry, but I'm scheduled for an overseas assignment, and there's nothing I can do. Besides, she's the woman you chose. You can't blame anyone else. Take care of your own wife. Upon learning I couldn't assist due to my overseas posting, he pleaded, help me. Take me with you to your new overseas position. I can't stand this filthy woman anymore. Life was better with you. Give me another chance. But even if he asks for another chance, he wanted this outcome. No matter how much he struggles, he can't return to the previous state. He was still talking over the phone, but I left him hanging, said I had work, and ended the call. Then I blocked his number. He didn't like that. It seems that very day he showed up at my parents' house, demanding a remarriage and help, spouting nonsense. My father called the police, and he was taken to the station. The company found out about this, and he got fired. He also got divorced, and to pay alimony, he is helping out with the family business while taking care of his mother. Apparently, the family business is physically demanding and quite harsh, and he tries to run away from home many times. But each time he is brought back by relatives, and he seems to be having a hard time every day.
Greg, this is the last time you'll open our home to strangers without asking me. I dropped my bag on the kitchen counter, eyes blazing at the scene before me. Come on, it's just Rob. He's like a brother. Greg looked up from his beer, a lazy grin plastered on his face. You know how my day was. I just wanted peace tonight. My tone wasn't just firm, it was a warning. Rob leaned back on the couch, clearly sensing the tension, but choosing to stay silent. He sipped on his beer, eyes flicking between Greg and me. It's not a big deal, Meredith. It's not like I threw a party, Greg chuckled. No, I said, crossing my arms, but it's the principle, respecting each other's space. Greg sighed, standing up and walking over to the fridge. He grabbed another beer, deliberately ignoring my feelings. My blood boiled hotter. This isn't the first time, Greg. I ran my hand through my hair, trying to control my anger. I was really looking forward to my show tonight. Greg popped open the beer, avoiding eye contact. You can still watch it. I looked at the clock, knowing the episode had already started. And how am I supposed to focus with you two laughing and chatting? Greg still didn't get it. Or maybe he didn't want to. Rob's here for one night. Chill out. Rob, sensing a storm brewing, finally spoke. Maybe I should leave. No, Rob, I said sharply, not taking my eyes off Greg. You're here now. Let's just get through it. Greg shrugged and took a lazy swig of his beer. See? No harm done. I seethed as I walked past them, heading to the bedroom. I couldn't deal with this again. It wasn't about Rob or anyone specific. It was about respect, something Greg seemed to lack when it came to our shared space. I closed the door behind me and sunk onto the bed. Turning on the TV, the familiar intro to my true crime show filled the room, but my mind was elsewhere. Greg's disregard wasn't new. This pattern had been going on for months. 10 minutes into the episode, Greg knocked on the door and entered before I could respond. Meredith, seriously? Let's not fight over this. I muted the TV, frustration boiling over. Greg, it's not about Rob. It's about you not taking my feelings seriously. Can't you see that? He gave a bad imitation of a remorseful look and sat down next to me. I guess I didn't think it was that big of a deal. You didn't think, I repeated, voice trembling not with sadness but with sheer anger. That's the whole problem. This is our home. You can't just invite people over without asking. Greg stayed silent. I continued, not letting him off the hook. I need you to understand how much this matters to me. He finally met my eyes, a flicker of realization but also resistance. All right, I get it. I'll ask next time. The way he said it, I wasn't convinced. It felt like a placation, a way to end the argument for now. Promise me, I demanded. Promise you'll respect our space. Yeah, he nodded, but the nonchalance in his eyes worried me. Sure. I watched him leave the room, the door closing with a quiet click. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, knowing this issue was far from over. It was about more than just friends and unexpected visits. It was about respect, and that was something Greg seemed to have a hard time grasping. As the muted TV flickered shadows on the walls, I realized the real struggle had just begun. The next morning, I woke up early, the weight of yesterday still heavy on my mind. Greg was snoring lightly next to me, oblivious to the turmoil he had caused. I didn't want to start the day with more arguments, but I knew that we needed to have a real conversation about last night. I got dressed and went downstairs, choosing to wait for Greg to wake up. I busied myself with making coffee, the aroma filling the kitchen and providing some comfort. About an hour later, Greg finally stumbled into the kitchen, scratching his head and yawning. "Morning," he mumbled. I didn't respond immediately, focusing instead on pouring coffee into 2 mugs. Finally, I turned to him. "We need to talk." Greg looked at me with a hint of annoyance. "About what? Rob's gone now. Can't we just let it go?" "No, Greg, we can't just let it go." I handed him a mug, my eyes hard. "You keep inviting people over without asking me. Last night was just another example of you not respecting my space." He sighed dramatically. "You're blowing this out of proportion, Meredith." "Am I?" I challenged, setting my mug down with a thud. "Every time this happens, you brush it off like it's nothing. But it's not nothing to me. What do you want me to do? Start sending you calendar invites?" Greg scoffed. "I want you to think about me before making decisions that affect both of us." "Is that too much to ask?" Greg rolled his eyes. "You know what your problem is? You're too rigid. You need to relax. Life isn't just about schedules and rules." I felt my fists clench. "You're missing the point. This is about respect, Greg. Respect for our home and for each other. I'm not asking for much." He took a sip of his coffee, avoiding my eyes. "I'll try to remember next time, all right? Can we drop it now?" I didn't believe him. His dismissive tone told me all I needed to know. "This isn't the first time this has happened, Greg. It's becoming a pattern, and it's not just about last night. There have been plenty of other times." I paused, expecting him to argue, but he stayed silent. Emboldened, I continued, "Every time you do this, it makes me feel like you don't care about my needs, like I'm invisible." Greg finally looked up, irritation clear on his face. "Are you seriously going to make this into a big deal? It was one night, Meredith." I shook my head, tears of frustration welling up. "That's exactly it. You always think it's just one night, one small thing, but those small things keep piling up." He set his mug down more forcefully than necessary. "Fine, from now on, I'll ask. Happy?" "No, because I don't believe you mean it," I replied, voice trembling but firm. "I need you to understand that this is serious. If you keep ignoring my feelings, this won't work." Greg stared at me, seemingly taken aback by my ultimatum. "You're really serious, aren't you?" "Yes, Greg, I am." I turned away, needing to get some distance. "Think about what I've said." As I walked out of the kitchen, I knew that this wasn't the end of our argument, but at least I had made it clear that things needed to change. I came home from work later that week, hoping for a quiet evening, but the sound of laughter hit me as soon as I opened the door. Greg was sitting in the living room with 2 of his friends, beers on the coffee table, the TV blaring. "Hey, you're home," Greg said, barely looking up. I forced a smile, trying to hide my frustration. "I see we have more guests." One of his friends, Kevin, nodded at me. "Hey, Meredith. Greg said it was cool to come over." I gritted my teeth, shooting a look at Greg. "Can I talk to you in the kitchen for a second?" Greg sighed but followed me. Once we were out of earshot, I turned to him. "What did we just talk about last week?" He shrugged, clearly annoyed. "What now?" "I asked you to inform me before inviting people over. You promised, Greg." "I forgot. It's not a big deal," he said, crossing his arms defensively. "It is a big deal to me," I said, my voice rising. "You keep ignoring my feelings. It's like you don't even care." He rolled his eyes. "You're overreacting, Meredith. We're just hanging out." "No, I'm not overreacting. You keep doing this, and it's disrespectful. I need peace when I come home." Greg leaned against the counter, shaking his head. "You're acting like a control freak. Lighten up." I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "This isn't about control. It's about respect. This is our home. Both of us need a say. Whatever, he muttered, already walking back to his friends. I stood there, feeling the sting of his words. This wasn't going anywhere. I knew then that Greg had no intention of changing. The realization settled heavily in my chest. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, while the muffled sounds of their laughter and chatter seeped through the walls. It was hopeless. Greg didn't care about my needs or the impact of his actions on our relationship. As the night dragged on, my resolve hardened. If he wouldn't respect our space, I would make sure to reclaim it myself. The following morning, Greg was already up and about, seemingly oblivious to the argument from the night before. I found him in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone. "We need to talk," I said, stepping in. "Again?" Greg sighed, not even looking up. "Yes, again. Because things haven't changed. You keep dismissing me, Greg, and it's not okay." He finally looked up, irritation evident. "What do you want from me, Meredith? I said I'd try to remember. Can you just drop it?" "No, I can't just drop it. If you can't respect this one simple request, what else won't you respect?" Greg threw his hands up. "Fine. You want respect? Respect works both ways. Stop nagging me about every little thing." I took a step back, hurt by his outburst. "I'm not nagging. I'm asking for basic consideration." Greg scoffed. "You know what? Maybe you're too sensitive. Maybe that's the problem." I felt a lump in my throat, but pushed it down. "Maybe, but that doesn't excuse your behavior." He stared at me, unyielding. "I'll do better. This conversation is over." But as he stormed out, I knew it wasn't. This was far from over. Respect wasn't something you demanded. It was earned. And if Greg couldn't see that, then I needed to take steps to protect myself and my peace. There was no turning back now. Greg had shown his true colors, and it was time for me to act. The days moved forward in an uncomfortable truce. Greg seemed more irritable, his attitude flaring up without warning. I, on the other hand, sank deeper into planning. The next incident had to be handled decisively. One evening after work, I decided to put my foot down. "Greg, we need to talk," I said as he lounged on the couch, aimlessly flipping through channels. He huffed, but muted the TV. "What is it this time?" I sat down across from him, eyes unwavering. "No more uninvited guests without informing me first." Greg smirked, a mischievous glint in his eyes. Sure. I'll send out a notification next time," he joked. I leaned forward, seriousness radiating from me. "I mean it, Greg. This is non-negotiable. We are in this together. Respect my wishes or we will have a serious problem." He gave a nonchalant shrug. "Fine. No more surprises. Happy now? You promise?" I pressed. Yeah, I promise," he said, waving me off. The following week, the atmosphere felt lighter initially. Maybe, just maybe, he'd finally understood. But deep down, I remained skeptical. Friday came, and as soon as I walked through the door, the sound of loud music and laughter greeted me. My heart sank. "Greg!" I shouted over the noise. He sauntered over, a drink in his hand, smiling like he owned the place. "Hey, babe, welcome home. Great timing." I glared at him, fury building. "What is this, Greg? We talked about this." "It's just a small get-together," he said, as if it explained everything. Don't be such a buzzkill." "Small get-together? There are at least 10 people here. This isn't what we agreed on," I said, my voice trembling with anger. Greg took a sip of his drink, unbothered. "Relax, Meredith. It's the weekend. Just have a drink and join us." I shook my head, feeling the last straw break. "This is it, Greg. I can't take this anymore." He laughed, his tone mocking. Don't be dramatic. It's just a party." I turned on my heel and stormed out, heading straight to our bedroom. As the door shut behind me, I picked up my phone and called the divorce lawyer I had researched weeks before. It was time to take action. Over the next few days, I began to quietly prepare. I gathered documents, bank statements, anything that might be useful. I stayed out of Greg's way, avoiding unnecessary confrontation. But the tension was palpable. One evening, Greg confronted me. "You've been weirdly quiet lately. What's going on?" I looked at him dispassionately. "Just thinking about a lot of things." "Are you still upset about the party?" "Meredith, you really need to let it go." "I can't, Greg. It's not just the party. It's everything. This isn't working anymore." He frowned, confusion turning into anger. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I need respect, and you're clearly incapable of giving it. I'm done." Greg laughed, though it was hollow and uneasy. "You're bluffing." I faced him, resolute. "No, I'm not. I spoke to a lawyer." The color drained from his face. A lawyer? Are you insane? No, just tired. Tired of not being heard, of not being respected. This isn't a game, Greg. It's my life, and I'm taking it back. Greg's expression turned dark. You'll regret this, Meredith. But as I walked away, the only thing I felt was an overwhelming sense of clarity. There was no turning back. My next steps were firmly in place. Coming home one evening, I hoped for quiet. Instead, I walked into chaos. Music blared, voices echoed, the unmistakable signs of another party. My stomach clenched, anger rising. I pushed through the mess of shoes and coats littering the hallway. Greg! I called out. No response. I found him in the living room, surrounded by friends, drink in hand, the party in full swing. He looked up and saw me, a slow smirk spreading across his face. Meredith, join us, why don't you? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. Greg, we need to talk. Now. Ignoring my tone, he laughed. Everyone, meet the boss of the house, he said, clearly amused at his own joke. People glanced at me, some sympathetic, others just curious. I felt a mix of embarrassment and fury. Greg, now. He shrugged, setting his drink down and following me into the kitchen. As soon as the door closed behind us, I turned to him, eyes blazing. What is this? We talked about this. No more parties. He leaned against the counter, unbothered. You're being dramatic. It's just a few friends. No, Greg. This is disrespectful and you keep doing it. I could feel my hands shaking. Greg's expression turned cold. You're blowing this way out of proportion. It's just one night. One night? I scoffed. This is the third time this month. I've had enough. You need to chill, Meredith, he replied, dismissive. Life can't be all rules and schedules. I can't live like this, Greg. I've already spoken to a lawyer, I said, my voice firm. His face twisted in surprise, then anger. A lawyer? For what? This. Yes, Greg, this, I said, gesturing around. It's clear you don't care about my feelings. You promised to respect our home, and you broke that promise. He took a step closer, sneering. You're really going to throw away our marriage over a couple of parties? Yes, I am. Because it's not just the parties. It's the constant disrespect, the disregard for my feelings. I'm done. He looked at me, eyes narrowing. You think you can just walk away? Good luck, Meredith. You'll regret this. I didn't flinch. Maybe, but it can't be worse than this. Without another word, I walked past him, grabbed my phone, and went to the bedroom. My hands were shaking as I called the lawyer again, setting up a meeting to finalize the papers. I couldn't keep doing this. Later that night, after everyone left, Greg stumbled into the bedroom. So that's it? We're done? He slurred, clearly drunk. Yes, Greg. We're done, I said, not looking up from packing a small bag. I'm leaving tonight. He grabbed my arm, making me look at him. You won't survive without me. I pulled my arm free. Watch me. Leaving the house felt surreal, like stepping out of a nightmare. As I drove away, the weight on my chest started to lift. This was just the beginning, but it was my beginning. There was no going back. My next chapter started now. I woke up early, the sun barely breaking through the curtains. The divorce papers lay on the nightstand, staring at me like a challenge waiting to be met. Today was the day. I took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of resolve and anxiety. By the time Greg woke up and stumbled into the kitchen, I was ready. I placed the papers on the table, my heart pounding. Good morning, Greg groaned, not yet noticing the documents. Morning, I replied, my voice calm. We need to talk. He finally saw the papers and froze. What's this? Divorce papers, I said with finality. I'm serious, Greg. You need to sign them. His eyes widened with a mix of shock and anger. You're really doing this? Yes, I am, I said. You had every chance to change. I need respect and peace, and you can't give me that. He grabbed the papers and waved them at me. This is insane. You're throwing away everything over a few arguments? It's not just a few arguments, Greg. It's about trust, respect, all the things you seem to lack. He slapped the papers back on the table. You'll regret this, Meredith. You think you won, but you haven't. I held my ground, my voice steady. This isn't about winning or losing. It's about my peace and my future. He stared at me for a long moment before finally slumping into a chair. Fine. You want your precious respect? Here, he said, grabbing a pen and scrawling his signature angrily. Take it. A wave of relief washed over me, but I remained composed. Thank you. As he handed the papers back, his eyes darkened. Don't think for a second that this is over. You'll see. The threat hung in the air, but I didn't flinch. Goodbye, Greg, I said, turning away and heading out the door. The fresh air hitting my face felt liberating. The next few days flew by. I moved into a small, cozy apartment across town. It was a fresh start, a new beginning that I desperately needed. I dedicated myself to my work, pouring my energy into something constructive. My colleagues noticed the shift, offering support and encouragement. During a quiet evening, as I was organizing my thoughts, my phone rang. It was Dorothy, Greg's mother. "Meredith, we need to talk," she said, her voice firm. "Of course, Dorothy. What's going on?" "Come over to the house. We need to discuss this in person." I drove over, nervous but determined. Dorothy greeted me at the door, her expression serious. "I heard about the divorce," she said as we sat down in the living room. "Yes, it was a difficult decision, but necessary." She nodded, her gaze piercing. "I need you to know something about Greg. His father, he had similar issues. I never intervened, thinking he would change, but he never did." I was stunned, but I listened intently. "Greg has been irresponsible and manipulative, even with money. He's accrued debts in your name and drained the joint account." My stomach clenched. "How could he do this?" Dorothy sighed, eyes filled with regret. "I thought he'd grow out of it. Apparently I was wrong." I felt a mix of anger and betrayal. "What do I do now?" Dorothy reached out, taking my hand. "I stand with you on this. We need to set things right. I'll help in any way I can." Her support was a lifeline. Together, we devised a plan to confront Greg and hold him accountable. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life and ensuring such deceit wouldn't go unpunished. As I drove back to my apartment later that night, a sense of determination settled over me. Greg wasn't going to get away with this. The fight was far from over, but I wasn't alone anymore. I stood outside Greg's apartment, my heart pounding with a mix of anxiety and determination. Dorothy's words echoed in my mind, stealing my resolve. Today was the day I confronted Greg with the financial deceit he'd been hiding. I knocked firmly. A moment later, the door swung open. Greg, looking disheveled, stared at me in surprise. "Meredith? What the hell are you doing here?" "We need to talk," I said, pushing past him and into the apartment. Dorothy followed, her presence a silent support. Greg closed the door, clearly annoyed. "What's this about?" "I found out about the debts, Greg. The ones you racked up in my name," I said bluntly, eyes locked on his. His face went pale, but then he laughed, a nervous, mocking sound. "Oh, come on. You're overreacting. They're just a few charges." Dorothy stepped forward, her expression stern. "Don't lie, Greg. We have the evidence." Greg's eyes flickered with anger. "So what? You're here to gang up on me? Make me the bad guy?" "You are the bad guy," I said, keeping my voice level. "You betrayed my trust, and now you need to own up to it." He sneered, crossing his arms. "And if I don't, then we'll take legal action." "Fraud is a serious crime, Greg," Dorothy said, her tone unyielding. Greg's defiance wavered. He looked between us, his bravado starting to crack. "Fine. What do you want?" "Repay every cent you took from the joint account. Clear all debts in my name," I demanded. "And I want it in writing," he scoffed. "You think I have that kind of money just lying around?" Dorothy stepped closer, eyes blazing. "Then sell your assets, figure it out. You created this mess, you will fix it." Greg's face contorted with frustration and fear. "You're ruining my life, Meredith." "No, Greg," I said quietly. "You ruined mine. I'm just taking it back." He glared at me, then at Dorothy. "You both can't do this." Dorothy's voice was calm but firm. "We already have. I've spoken to a lawyer too. If you don't comply, they'll take it from here." Greg's shoulders slumped. He looked defeated, a shadow of the man who had once thought he had all the power. "Fine. I'll do it. Anything to get you off my back." "Good," I said, relief washing over me. "I'll have the paperwork ready by the end of the week. Sign it, and we'll be done." We turned to leave, but Greg called out, "Meredith, wait." I paused, not looking back. "What is it, Greg?" "I'm sorry," he said, his voice softer, though still tinged with bitterness. I turned around, meeting his eyes. "Too late for that, Greg. Actions have consequences. I hope you learn from this." Dorothy and I walked out, the weight of confrontation lifting slightly. As we reached my car, she turned to me, her expression softening. "You did well in there." "Thanks to you," I said, gratitude filling my voice. "I couldn't have done it alone." She nodded. "Now focus on your future. Don't let him drag you down again." Driving away, I felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. The battle was far from over, but I had allies. Greg's manipulations had come to light, and I was taking control of my life. A sense of empowerment surged within me. This was just the beginning of my journey towards reclaiming my happiness. Moving out of Greg's shadow felt like stepping into the sunlight after years in the dark. I settled into my new apartment, finding comfort in the quiet simplicity of my own space. There were no more unexpected parties, no more shouting matches, just peace. One evening, as I was settling into my new home routine, my phone rang. It was my lawyer, Sarah. "Meredith, I have some good news," she said, her voice calm but decisive. "We've settled the financial issues with Greg. He's agreed to repay everything." A wave of relief washed over me. "Thank you, Sarah. This means so much." "Of course," she replied. "We'll make sure he complies with the agreement. Don't worry about a thing." Hanging up, a deep sense of completion settled over me. But I knew that Greg wouldn't make it easy. A few weeks later, I received a call from an unknown number. Picking up, I was greeted by Greg's voice, strained and desperate. "Meredith, please, can we talk?" he pleaded. "What is it, Greg?" I kept my tone flat, emotions in check. "I'm struggling. I don't know how to deal with all this, selling the house, repaying debts. It's too much," he said, voice cracking slightly. "That's the consequence of your actions, Greg. You brought this upon yourself," I replied, feeling a pang of pity but quickly pushing it aside. "Can we at least meet up, just to talk things over?" he asked, desperation clear in his tone. "No, Greg, we're done. The papers are signed and the agreement is in place. I have nothing more to say to you," I said firmly. "You can't be this cold, Meredith. I need help," he tried again. "I helped you for too long, Greg. Now you have to help yourself," I said, hanging up before he could respond. I knew his plea was another attempt to manipulate me, to drag me back into his web of chaos, but I was beyond that now. My focus was on healing, rebuilding, and moving forward. Dorothy visited me a few days later, bringing over a housewarming gift. "How's the new place?" she asked, looking around. "It's perfect. Peaceful," I said, smiling genuinely. "I'm glad to hear that," she said, sighing. "Greg called me too. He's struggling." "I know," I replied. "He called me asking for help." She shook her head. "He needs to learn responsibility. This is the only way." "I agree," I said. "Thank you for your support, Dorothy. I couldn't have done this without you." She smiled, taking my hand. "You're strong, Meredith. Don't ever doubt that." As days turned into weeks, Greg's situation worsened. Forced to sell assets to pay back the debts, his life of reckless abandon came crashing down. I watched from a distance, detached, as he scrambled to pick up the pieces. In contrast, my life took a turn for the better. Work became my sanctuary, a place where I could channel my energy into something productive. My colleagues noticed the change, often complimenting my renewed focus and determination. One day, Sarah called again with the final update. "Greg has completed the payments. Everything's settled now." "Thank you, Sarah," I said, feeling truly free for the first time in years. After the call, I took a moment to reflect. Greg was a chapter of my life that had closed. Now it was time to write new ones, filled with peace, respect, and self-love. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over my new apartment, I felt a profound sense of liberation. The darkness of the past was behind me, and the future was bright with possibilities. Greg might still reach out, but his calls would go unanswered. I had reclaimed my life, and it was mine to cherish. I stared at the plate of food in front of me, Derek's words still ringing in my ears. "Wow! Lo, I didn't think it was possible, but your cooking gets worse every day." I sighed, setting down my fork. "Is it really that bad?" I asked, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. Derek scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "Worse. I wouldn't even feed it to a stray dog. You can't cook, you can't clean, and you can't even give me a kid. What good are you?" His words cut deep, piercing the fragile remnants of my self-esteem. I opened my mouth to respond, but his mother, Gwen, beat me to it. Now, Derek," she chided, though her tone held no real reproach. "Don't be too hard on the girl. It's not her fault she's a failure in every sense of the word." I flinched, her insult stinging like a slap to the face. It wasn't the first time they'd belittled me, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. Living with Derek and his mother was a constant battle, a war of attrition against my very soul. As I cleared the table and set about washing the dishes, my mind drifted back to the countless times I'd tried to conceive, only to be met with disappointment and Derek's scathing remarks about my inadequacy. The words barren and useless echoed in my mind, taunting me with my perceived failures. Little did they know, I had recently discovered something that would change everything. While scrolling through social media forums, I came across a series of posts made by Derek himself, mocking my lack of culinary skills and expressing his desire for a divorce. He painted himself as the victim, a man trapped in a loveless marriage, seeking sympathy from strangers online. As I finished the dishes and retreated to the solace of my bedroom, I couldn't help but feel a sense of determination rising within me. For too long, I had allowed Derek and Gwen to diminish me, to strip away my sense of self-worth. But no more. It was time to take control of my life, to break free from the shackles of their cruelty. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to fight for my happiness, my dignity, and my future. This was just the beginning, the spark that would ignite a fire of change, burning away the chains that had bound me for far too long. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of Derek's voice, already berating me for some perceived failure. "Leela, where's my clean shirt? I have an important meeting today, and you couldn't even do one simple task." I hurried into the living room, bleary-eyed and still in my pajamas. "I'm sorry, Derek, I'll get your shirt ready right away." Gwen clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "Honestly, Lila, it's like you don't even try. No wonder my son is so disappointed in you." I bit my tongue, holding back the retort that threatened to spill forth. Instead, I scurried to the laundry room, grabbing Derek's freshly pressed shirt from the pile of clean clothes. As I handed it to him, he snatched it from my grasp, his expression one of disdain. "Took you long enough. At this rate, I'll be late for work." "I'm sorry," I mumbled, but he had already turned away, his attention focused on his phone. The rest of the day passed in a blur of monotony. I went to work, enduring the usual drudgery of my insurance job, only to return home and face the endless cycle of chores and criticism. Derek and Gwen seemed to take particular delight in pointing out my every flaw, no matter how insignificant. "Did you even bother cleaning the bathroom today?" Gwen sneered as I entered the kitchen to start dinner. "Of course I did," I responded, my voice weary. "Well, it doesn't look like it," Derek chimed in, his tone dripping with contempt. "But I guess I shouldn't be surprised. You're useless at everything else. Why would cleaning be any different?" I fought back tears as I turned my attention to the stove, determined not to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Little did they know, their constant jabs were only fueling the fire burning within me, a fire that would soon consume their complacent cruelty. As the evening wore on, another source of tension emerged, Derek's gambling addiction. He had been losing money at an alarming rate, and the stress of his mounting debts was palpable. "You need to get your shit together," Gwen hissed, her voice low but venomous. "If you keep pissing away our money like this, we'll end up on the street." Derek slammed his fist on the table, his face flushed with anger. "Back off, Mother. It's none of your business how I spend my money." "It is when you're gambling away our future." Gwen shot back, her eyes blazing with fury. I watched the exchange unfold, a twisted sense of satisfaction creeping over me. Their dysfunction, their toxicity, it was all coming to a head, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the whole house of cards came crashing down. As I lay in bed that night, the weight of Derek's emotional and financial abuse pressing down on me, I made a decision. No more would I be the victim, the punching bag for their cruelty. It was time to take control, to exact my revenge and reclaim my life. The thought filled me with a sense of determination, a steely resolve that would carry me through the battles to come. Derek and Gwen had no idea what was in store for them, but they would soon learn the true cost of their actions. The breaking point came a few nights later, when Derek stormed into the house, reeking of alcohol and anger. "Where the hell is my dinner, woman?" he slurred, his words slurring together. I stepped out of the kitchen, wiping my hands on a towel. "It's almost ready, Derek. Just give me a few more minutes," he sneered, his eyes narrowing. "That's what you always say. Useless, just like everything else you do." Before I could respond, Gwen chimed in from the living room. "Don't talk to her like that, Derek. She's trying her best." "Her best?" he spat, rounding on his mother. "Her best is pathetic. I should have left this worthless sack years ago." Something inside me snapped at his words. Years of pent-up frustration, anger, and resentment came bubbling to the surface, and I couldn't hold it back any longer. "That's enough," I shouted, my voice trembling with fury. I've had it with your constant abuse, your endless belittling. I'm not going to take it anymore." Derek's eyes widened, caught off guard by my sudden outburst. "What did you just say to me?" "You heard me," I continued, emboldened by my newfound courage. "I'm done being your punching bag, your emotional doormat. I deserve better than this, better than you." Gwen opened her mouth to interject, but I cut her off with a sharp glare. "And you're just as bad as he is, enabling his behavior, joining in on the insults. Well, no more." I turned back to Derek, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "I'm leaving you, Derek. I'm filing for divorce, and I'm going to make sure you pay for every ounce of suffering you've put me through." For a moment, Derek was speechless, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. Then his expression twisted into one of rage. "You ungrateful bitch," he snarled, taking a step towards me. I stood my ground, unflinching. "Don't even think about it," I warned, my voice low and steady. "I'm not the same doormat you've been kicking around all these years." With that, I brushed past him, ignoring his sputtered threats and insults. I quickly packed a bag with some essentials and headed for the door, my heart pounding in my chest. As I stepped outside, I took a deep breath of the cool night air, a sense of freedom washing over me. I knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in years, I felt alive, invigorated by the prospect of reclaiming my life. I made my way to my brother Jason's house, knocking on the door with a newfound sense of purpose. When he opened it, his eyes widened at the sight of my disheveled appearance and the bag slung over my shoulder. "Lila, what's going on?" I steeled myself, pushing back the tears that threatened to spill forth. "It's over, Jason. I'm leaving Derek for good this time." Without hesitation, he ushered me inside, wrapping me in a comforting embrace. As I clung to him, the weight of years of abuse finally lifting from my shoulders, I knew that this was just the beginning of my journey towards reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my sense of self-worth. And Derek and Gwen? They would soon learn the true meaning of karma, the consequences of their actions rippling outward like a tidal wave, sweeping away the foundations of their smug superiority. After recounting the years of abuse I had endured at the hands of Derek and Gwen, Jason and his wife Emma were furious. Emma's eyes blazed with anger as she pulled me into a tight hug. "That bastard," she spat. "How dare he treat you like that? You don't deserve any of this, Lila." Jason nodded in agreement, his jaw clenched. "We're going to make him pay for what he's done. You have our full support, sis." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, grateful for their unwavering support. With their help, I knew I could finally break free from Derek's toxic grip. Over the next few days, we hatched a plan. First, I contacted a divorce lawyer to begin the legal process of separating from Derek. The lawyer assured me that with the evidence of his abuse and financial misdeeds, I had a strong case for securing alimony and a sizable settlement. Next, we turned our attention to building a solid case against Derek. Jason and Emma helped me gather documentation of his gambling debts, his online rants, and any other evidence we could find to expose his true nature. "We need to hit him where it hurts," Emma said, her voice steely with determination. "That money-grubbing prick needs to learn that there are consequences for his actions." It was then that I remembered Derek's estranged aunt, May. She had always been critical of his behavior, and she held the keys to the family inheritance. If we could get her on our side, it would be a devastating blow to Derek and Gwen. I reached out to May, explaining the situation and pleading for her help. At first, she was hesitant, but as I revealed the depth of Derek's cruelty and Gwen's complicity, her resolve hardened. "That boy has always been a disappointment," she fumed, "and to think his mother enabled such despicable behavior? It's unforgivable." With May on board, our plan began to take shape. She agreed to withhold the inheritance from Derek and Gwen unless they made amends for their actions, essentially leaving them financially destitute. As the preparations continued, I couldn't help but feel a sense of empowerment coursing through me. For years I had been the victim, cowering in fear and submission. But now the tables had turned, and it was my turn to dictate the terms of our engagement. Derek and Gwen had no idea what was coming, but they would soon learn the true price of their cruelty. With each step we took, I could feel the weight of their oppression lifting, replaced by a newfound strength and determination. This was more than just revenge, it was a reclamation of my dignity, a declaration that I would no longer be defined by their abuse. I was taking back control of my life, and nothing would stand in my way. As the plan solidified, I found myself growing more confident, more assertive. The old Lila, the meek and submissive doormat, was gone. In her place stood a woman emboldened, a warrior ready to fight for her rightful place in the world. And when the time came to confront Derek and Gwen, to unveil the truth and watch their carefully constructed facade crumble around them, I would savor every moment. They had sown the seeds of their own destruction, and I would be there to reap the bitter harvest, a testament to the power of resilience and the indomitable human spirit. A week after I left Derek, my phone rang. It was him, no doubt looking to smooth things over with empty promises and hollow apologies. I steeled myself before answering, determined not to let his manipulations sway me. "What do you want, Derek?" I asked, my voice firm. "Lila, listen," he began, his tone sickly sweet. "I think we've both said some things we didn't mean. Why don't you come back home, and we can work this out like adults?" I scoffed. "Work it out? You mean like how we've worked it out for the past few years, with you berating and belittling me at every turn?" "That's in the past," he insisted. "I've changed, I promise. Things will be different." I could practically hear the smugness dripping from his words, as if he expected me to come crawling back at the first sign of his supposed contrition. "Save it, Derek," I spat. "I'm not falling for your lies anymore. I want a divorce, and I'm not going to let you sweet-talk your way out of this." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when he spoke again, his voice was laced with barely contained fury. "Listen here, you ungrateful little wench. You're going to sign those divorce papers, and you're going to do it without causing any trouble. You got that?" I smiled, unfazed by his empty threats. "Or what, Derek? You'll insult me some more? Throw a tantrum like a petulant child? I'm not afraid of you anymore." He sputtered, caught off guard by my newfound defiance. "You'll regret this, Lila. Mark my words, I'll make your life a living hell." "I doubt that," I replied coolly. "In fact, I think it's going to be the other way around. You and your mother are going to pay for every ounce of pain and humiliation you've put me through." With that, I ended the call, a sense of triumph surging through me. The old Derek, with his empty bravado and hollow threats, no longer held any power over me. Over the next few days, Jason, Emma, May, and I finalized our plan. We gathered all the evidence we could find, from financial records to social media posts, painting a damning picture of Derek's misdeeds and Gwen's complicity. As the day of our confrontation approached, I could feel the anticipation building within me. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the chance to strip away their false bravado and expose them for the cruel, vile people they truly were. We rehearsed the confrontation, going over every detail with meticulous care. I practiced my lines, my body language, determined to project an aura of confidence and strength that would leave no room for doubt. Finally, the day arrived. I took a deep breath, steeling my nerves as I approached the house I had once called home. Even from the outside, I could sense an uneasy cleanliness, as if Derek had already moved on and brought his mistress in before our separation was finalized. As I stepped inside, the stale air hit me like a slap in the face, a reminder of the oppressive atmosphere that had once permeated these walls. But now the tables had turned, and it was my turn to dictate the terms of our engagement. Derek and Gwen sat in the living room, their expressions a mix of surprise and contempt. Before they could utter a word, I launched into my prepared speech, laying out the evidence of their cruelty and financial misdeeds with surgical precision. As I spoke, I could see the color drain from their faces, the realization of their impending downfall slowly sinking in. Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, utterly blindsided by the depth of our preparations. And then, just as I was about to deliver the final blow, the front door opened and May stepped inside, her steely gaze sweeping over the room. "Hello, nephew," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "It seems we have much to discuss." The look on Derek and Gwen's faces as May entered the room was priceless. Their smug arrogance melted away, replaced by a mixture of fear and disbelief. They knew, in that moment, that the game was up. "Aunt May," Derek stammered, attempting to regain his composure. "What are you doing here?" May fixed him with a withering glare. "Don't play dumb with me, boy. I'm here because of the shameful way you've treated this poor woman. She gestured towards me, her lips pressed into a thin line. Gwen, never one to back down, tried to interject. Now, May, I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. Derek and Lila are just going through a rough patch, that's all. A rough patch? May scoffed. From what I've heard, this has been going on for years. Years of emotional abuse, financial manipulation, and outright cruelty. I watched as Derek's face contorted with rage, his fists clenching at his sides. Who have you been talking to? Lila's been filling your head with lies, trying to turn you against me. Enough of your lies, Derek, I spat, stepping forward. I have all the proof I need right here. I brandished a thick folder stuffed with documentation of his misdeeds. Gwen's eyes widened as she caught sight of the folder, and her complexion paled. Derek, what have you done? Before he could respond, I launched into my prepared speech, laying out the evidence of his gambling addiction, his financial mismanagement, and his vile online rants about me. With each word, I could see the confidence draining from their faces, replaced by a growing sense of dread. And that's not all, I continued, my voice ringing out with newfound strength. I have witnesses, people who can attest to the years of abuse I've endured at your hands. As if on cue, Jason and Emma entered the room, their expressions steely and resolute. They stood beside me, a united front against the crumbling facade of Derek and Gwen's lies. Derek's gaze darted from me to Jason, then back again, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Gwen, for once, was rendered speechless, her usual bravado nowhere to be found. It was at that moment that the front door opened once more, and a young woman stepped inside. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene before her, clearly not expecting such a confrontation. "Blake?" Derek croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman, Blake apparently, fixed him with a look of utter disgust. "You lied to me," she hissed. "You told me you were single, that you were ready for a committed relationship." Derek opened his mouth to respond, but May cut him off with a sharp wave of her hand. "Don't bother, Derek. Your web of deceit has unraveled, and we've all seen the truth." She turned to Blake, her expression softening slightly. "I'm sorry you got caught up in this mess, dear, but rest assured, my nephew and his mother will face the consequences of their actions." Blake nodded, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I want nothing more to do with him," she spat, shooting Derek a venomous glare before storming out. The room fell silent, the weight of the confrontation hanging heavy in the air. Derek and Gwen sat frozen, their carefully constructed facade of lies and deception crumbling around them, and as I looked at their stunned faces, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication wash over me. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when the scales of justice finally tipped in my favor. With a deep breath, I gathered my strength and delivered the final blow. "Derek, Gwen, your reign of terror is over. I'm suing for alimony and restitution, and I won't stop until you've paid for every ounce of suffering you've caused me." Their reactions were priceless, a mixture of disbelief, anger, and fear that left me savoring the sweet taste of revenge. They had sown the seeds of their own destruction, and now they would reap the bitter harvest. As I turned and walked out the door, Jason and Emma by my side, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The shackles of oppression had been broken, and I was finally free. Free to live my life on my own terms, to embrace the future with courage and determination. And as for Derek and Gwen, their day of reckoning was just beginning. The aftermath of the confrontation was like a whirlwind, with events unfolding at a dizzying pace. As Blake stormed out, her face twisted with rage and betrayal, Derek made one last-ditch effort to salvage his crumbling lies. "You can't seriously believe her," he sneered, gesturing towards me. "She's just trying to turn everyone against me, to take me for everything I've got." I fixed him with a steely glare, unfazed by his pathetic attempts at manipulation. "Save your breath, Derek. The jig is up and you know it." Jason stepped forward, his expression thunderous. "Don't even try it, man. We have more than enough evidence to bury you in court." "Evidence?" Gwen scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. "What kind of evidence could you possibly have?" In response, I tossed the thick folder onto the coffee table, its contents spilling out in a cascade of damning documentation. Financial records, printouts of Derek's online rants, even photos and witness statements. It was all there, laid bare for them to see. Derek's face paled as he rifled through the papers, his hands trembling with barely contained fury. "Where did you get all this?" he demanded, his voice rising in pitch. "That's not important," May interjected, her tone stern. "What's important is that we now know the truth about your gambling addiction, your financial misdeeds, and your despicable treatment of Lila." Gwen opened her mouth to protest, but May silenced her with a withering glare. "Don't even try to defend him, Gwen. You're just as culpable in all this, enabling his behavior and joining in on the abuse." Derek's eyes darted around the room, searching for any shred of support or sympathy, but he found none, only the cold, hard reality of his lies and misdeeds laid bare before him. "You can't do this to me," he snarled, his fists clenched at his sides. "I'll fight this, every step of the way. You won't get a damn cent from me." I couldn't help but laugh at his empty bravado, his desperate attempts to cling to the illusion of power. "Oh, but we will, Derek. We'll take everything from you, just like you tried to take everything from me." Emma stepped forward, her expression one of steely determination. "We're not just going after you for alimony and restitution. We're going to make sure you face the full consequences of your actions, legally and financially." Derek's shoulders slumped, the fight draining from his body as the weight of our words sank in. He knew, in that moment, that he had lost. That his carefully constructed web of lies and deceit had finally unraveled, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. Gwen, ever the loyal enabler, tried one last time to defend her precious son. "This is outrageous," she spat. "You can't just come into our home and make these wild accusations." But May wasn't having it. She turned to her sister-in-law, her eyes blazing with a fury I had never seen before. "Enough, Gwen. Enough of your blind loyalty and willful ignorance. It ends here, today." With a heavy sigh, May reached into her purse and withdrew a thick envelope. "This is my last will and testament," she announced, her voice ringing out with finality. "And as of this moment, both you and Derek are hereby disinherited." The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the sharp intake of breath from Derek and Gwen. Their faces, once so smug and arrogant, now twisted into masks of disbelief and horror. "You can't do that," Derek sputtered, his voice weak and hollow. But May simply shook her head, her expression unyielding. "I can, and I have. Consider it the price you must pay for your cruelty and deceit." And just like that, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Derek and Gwen, stripped of their ill-gotten wealth and inheritance, were left to face the harsh reality of their actions. Their world, once so carefully constructed on a foundation of lies and manipulation, had crumbled to dust. As I looked at their defeated faces, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph wash over me. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when justice was finally served, when the scales were balanced in my favor. And as I turned and walked away, leaving Derek and Gwen to wallow in the wreckage of their own making, I knew that this was just the beginning. The future was mine to shape, to mold into something beautiful and fulfilling, a future free from the shackles of their oppression. The road ahead would be long, but for the first time in years, I felt truly alive, empowered by the knowledge that I had taken back control of my life. And as for Derek and Gwen, well, they would have plenty of time to reflect on the consequences of their actions, to learn the bitter lesson that karma has a way of evening the score. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and emotional upheaval. True to my word, I pursued alimony and restitution from Derek with relentless determination, leaving no stone unturned in my quest for justice. With the mountains of evidence we had gathered, my lawyer made short work of Derek's feeble attempts at defense, his gambling debts, his online rants, and his emotional abuse. It was all laid bare for the court to see, painting a damning picture of his true character. Derek and Gwen, now disgraced and disinherited, could do little more than seethe in impotent rage as the legal system ground them down, stripping them of their ill-gotten wealth and privilege. With each court ruling in my favor, I could see the life draining from their eyes, the realization setting in that their reign of terror was truly at an end. And through it all, I stood tall and unwavering, bolstered by the support of Jason, Emma, and May. They were my rock, my foundation in the face of Derek and Gwen's increasingly desperate attempts to salvage their crumbling empire. You'll regret this, Lila, Derek spat one day after a particularly devastating court ruling. Mark my words, you'll never know peace as long as I'm breathing. I fixed him with a steely glare, his empty threats bouncing off me like water off a duck's back. Save your breath, Derek. You've lost, and you know it. It's time you accepted the consequences of your actions. With those words, I turned and walked away, leaving him to stew in his own impotent rage. His threats were hollow, his power stripped away by the weight of his own misdeeds. As the legal battles raged on, I found myself slowly shedding the shackles of my past, the weight of Derek and Gwen's oppression lifting from my shoulders. With each victory, each hard-won settlement or ruling in my favor, I felt a renewed sense of strength and determination, a fire burning within me that could not be extinguished. And as the dust finally settled, the final judgments handed down, I found myself in a position I never could have imagined. Financially secure, emotionally liberated, and finally free from the chains of my toxic marriage. Derek and Gwen, on the other hand, were left destitute and disgraced, their once lofty status crumbling around them like a house of cards. May had seen to it that they were evicted from the family home, left to fend for themselves in the harsh reality they had so callously inflicted upon others. As I stood in my new apartment, surrounded by the trappings of my newfound independence, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment wash over me. I had fought the good fight, weathered the storm of their cruelty, and emerged victorious, a testament to the indomitable human spirit and the power of resilience. In the months that followed, I threw myself into my career with renewed vigor, channeling my newfound confidence and determination into every aspect of my work. It wasn't long before my efforts were rewarded, and I found myself promoted to a senior position within the firm, a testament to my skills and dedication. But perhaps more importantly, I began to rediscover the parts of myself that had been suppressed for so long. My passions, my dreams, and my zest for life. I took up new hobbies, explored new interests, and surrounded myself with people who truly cared for me, who supported and uplifted me rather than tearing me down. And as for the prospect of a new relationship, well, I wasn't closing that door entirely. But this time I vowed to approach it with wisdom and discernment, never again allowing myself to be subjugated or diminished by another person's cruelty or insecurity. As I stood on the balcony of my apartment one evening, gazing out over the twinkling lights of the city, I couldn't help but marvel at the journey I had taken. From the depths of emotional and financial despair, I had risen like a phoenix from the ashes, stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. And in that moment, I made a silent vow, a vow to never again allow anyone to strip me of my dignity or self-worth. I was the master of my own destiny, the architect of my own future, and no one, not Derek, not Gwen, nor anyone else, could ever take that away from me again. With a deep breath and a smile on my face, I turned and went back inside, ready to embrace the next chapter of my life with open arms and an unwavering spirit. The past was behind me, and the future lay ahead, brimming with possibilities and the promise of a life truly lived on my own terms. Grace, you collapsed again? Unbelievable. Answer my calls, Grace. What kind of wife are you? Eric's voice blares through the phone, cutting through the ambulance sirens. I'm on my way to the hospital. I could lose the baby, I managed to say, holding back tears. The paramedics work around me, their faces focused and grim. Eric snorts on the other end. Well, we're here starving because you can't make dinner. Now you're relaxing in a hospital? Get it together. My throat tightens as I try to steady my breath. A paramedic looks at me with concern. You should focus on staying calm, ma'am. It's important for the baby. I nod, clenching my phone. Eric, I'm doing my best. This isn't about dinner. It's our child. His response is a heavy, frustrated sigh. Your best, huh? Seems like your best is just never enough. I hang up, unable to listen anymore. My heart pounds painfully in my chest, and not just from the physical strain. The paramedic shakes his head subtly. We'll be at the hospital soon. Just keep breathing. As I lie there, the thoughts of Eric's constant criticism and indifference replay in my mind like an old scratched record. Every harsh word echoes louder in the cold, confined space of the ambulance. Upon arrival at the hospital, I'm quickly wheeled into the maternity ward. Nurses move with practiced efficiency, and I catch snippets of diagnosis and concern. My OBGYN, Dr. Collins, arrives shortly after. "Grace, hang in there," she says with a calm yet urgent tone. "We're going to do everything we can to make sure both you and the baby are okay." I nod, feeling a tear slip down my cheek. "Thank you, Dr. Collins." Hours pass, marked by the beeping of monitors and the quiet hum of hospital activity. It feels surreal, a stark contrast to the chaos of my home life. Dr. Collins updates me regularly, her calm demeanor a lifeline amidst the storm within me. Eventually, the tension eases. "The baby is stable for now," she says, offering a reassuring smile, "but you need to avoid stress. It's crucial." I nod weakly, knowing how impossible that request feels with Eric at home. "I'll try, Doctor." The room grows silent once Dr. Collins leaves, except for the soft ticking of a nearby clock. I stare at it, counting the seconds, trying to slow my racing thoughts. I need to find a way out of this. My phone buzzes again, breaking the brief peace. It's a message from Eric. "Don't expect me to come. Sort yourself out." I toss the phone aside, feeling a surge of something I haven't in weeks. Anger. What kind of person can't even show up when their wife is in the hospital, risking everything for their unborn child? That anger simmers, providing a strange comfort. Maybe it's time I started thinking about what I need, what the baby needs. Not just what Eric wants. This realization hits me like a wave, both terrifying and liberating. The door creaks open, and a nurse enters with a tray of food. "Time to eat, Grace. You need your strength." I look at her, nodding. I'm not sure what my next steps will be, but one thing is clear. I need to get stronger. Strong enough to stand up for myself and my baby. Strong enough to face whatever comes next, even if that means facing Eric. I take the first bite, letting the warmth of the food seep into my bones. It's a small step, a simple action, but it feels like the beginning of something bigger, something necessary. For now, I focus on eating and breathing. The fight can wait until tomorrow. The fluorescent lights flickered above me, mimicking the flicker of emotions I felt inside. Leaning against the stark white hospital sheets, I closed my eyes, recalling a time when life seemed simpler. 2 years ago, I was one of the top marketing executives at my firm. I thrived on the rush of meetings, pitches, and late-night brainstorms. It was during one of these hectic days when I first met Eric. He wasn't always this way. Back then, he was charming and attentive, surprising me with coffee during those long nights, showering me with thoughtful gifts, and making me laugh. The memory felt distant now, almost like a dream. Losing myself in work, I hadn't seen the warning signs when our whirlwind romance led to a rushed marriage. Within a year, I was pregnant, and it became clear that my role would need to change. Eric gently suggested that I become a stay-at-home wife. "It's only until the baby arrives," he assured me, his arm around my shoulder. I agreed, believing him, and at the same time, believing in us. But as the months passed, the dynamic shifted. Eric's patience grew thinner, and his demands became relentless. This once affectionate man turned into someone colder, more critical with each passing day. "Nurse," I called, needing a voice to break my chain of thoughts. "Can I get some water?" My voice sounded weaker than I expected. "Of course, Mrs. Green," the nurse responded, smiling kindly. "Thank you," I murmured. As simple as the gesture was, it reminded me of basic decency, something Eric's behavior often lacked now. The nurse returned with a cup and placed it on the side table. "Try to rest, Mrs. Green. Stress isn't good for either of you." I nodded. "Please call me Grace." "All right, Grace," she said softly before stepping out. Her kindness was a balm, a stark contrast to what I faced daily. Eric's dismissive attitude wasn't confined to stressful moments. A week ago during a family dinner, his mother, Cheryl, pierced into me with her icy gaze. "Grace, this casserole is too salty. And don't you think you should have a better grip on household chores by now?" Before I could respond, Eric added, "Mom's right, Grace. For someone staying at home, you should be more proficient with these things by now." I had smiled tightly, swallowing the retort burning at the back of my throat. "I'm doing the best I can, Cheryl." "Well, your best needs to improve," she shot back, her eyes never leaving mine. That night, as I cleaned the dishes alone, I asked Eric why he never defended me. "They're my parents, Grace. I can't just argue with them over simple things. You need to handle it better. Handle it better." His words rang in my ears as I drank the water, thinking about how far I'd fallen from that confident executive to someone who now questioned her every move. But in this sterile hospital room, something new was budding, a resolve. Dr. Collins's words about stress and the nurse's simple kindness reminded me of a life beyond Eric's control. There was a world where I could be strong again, not just for me but for my child. I knew what needed to be done. Becoming that strong, independent woman again wouldn't be easy, but this collapsing, bending, and breaking needed to end, for my baby and for myself. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. It was Dr. Collins, holding a clipboard. "Grace, can we talk?" she asked gently. I nodded, steeling myself. "Of course, Dr. Collins. What do I need to know?" "It's about balancing your health and any external stress," she began, and I knew this was just the start of a conversation about taking back control. Dark times lay ahead with Eric, but with each moment in that hospital, I found my determination strengthening. It wasn't just about staying healthy. It was about reclaiming my life, one day at a time. The sunlight streamed through the windows as I sat propped up in my hospital bed, sorting through the cascading thoughts in my mind. Just as I was about to sip some water, my phone buzzed. Cheryl's name popped on the screen, making my heart pound faster. "Grace, you've been in that hospital long enough. You need to come home and take care of your duties," she began without preamble. "I'm not just lying here out of choice," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to stay here for the baby's health." "Excuses," she scoffed. "You are a useless wife to my son, and it's high time you step up. We want dinner ready when Eric gets home." The line went dead, leaving me trembling with anger. I had just endured a terrifying health scare, yet all they could think about was dinner? Suddenly, the hospital door swung open, and Eric stormed in. "Grace, what's with you ignoring mother's calls?" His face twisted with irritation. "I was resting," I said, gripping the bed rails for support. "The doctor said I need to avoid stress." "You're stressed? What about me, Grace? I'm the one working all day to support us." "You think I don't work?" I shot back, surprising myself with the sharpness of my tone. "I just expect," Eric began, but he stopped mid-sentence as Cheryl swept into the room, her face a mask of cold fury. "Really, Grace? Making excuses to avoid your responsibilities?" She turned to Eric. "Your father and I never had these issues. We raised you with discipline, not laziness." I clenched my fists. "I'm doing the best I can, Cheryl. I'm carrying your grandchild, remember?" Cheryl snorted. "Carrying a child is no excuse. Women have been doing it forever without causing such a scene." Eric looked at me, his eyes void of any sympathy. "Mom's right. You need to pull yourself together." This was the family dynamic I suffered through daily, unyielding and often merciless. But today it felt different. Something inside me shifted. These people, all their criticisms and commands, they no longer had the power they once wielded over me. "You're right. I do need to pull myself together," I said, my voice firm. "For myself and this baby. Because this situation," I gestured around the sterile room, "is not working." Eric and Cheryl both stared at me, stunned. "Grace, don't make things harder on yourself," Cheryl warned, her voice dripping with disdain. "Harder on myself?" I laughed bitterly. "I'm barely surviving this as it is." Cheryl turned to Eric. "See, this is what you get for marrying someone so weak." "That's enough, Cheryl." The words came out harsher than I intended, but I didn't care anymore. "You've both said your piece. Now, leave me alone." Eric's eyes narrowed. "Don't push it, Grace." I met his gaze and didn't flinch. "Get out, Eric. I need rest, and you're not helping." They finally walked out, leaving me in the suffocating silence of the room. The door clicked shut, and for the first time, I exhaled a breath I didn't know I was holding. The realization washed over me. I couldn't continue like this. This wasn't living. I knew I needed an exit strategy. My mind flashed back to a happier time when I had friends and allies, people who cared. Maybe, just maybe, there was someone who could help pull me out from this abyss. It was time to reach out, to find the strength I'd buried for so long. The nurse shifted the curtains, letting in the morning light. I sat up, adjusting the pillows behind me. My body ached, but determination filled my veins. I needed a way out, and every second brought me closer to reaching out for help. The door cracked open. I expected another nurse, but in walked a blast from my past, ally. Her hair was shorter now, and she looked more confident than ever, but those piercing blue eyes were unmistakable. "Grace?" she asked, her face a mixture of surprise and concern. I blinked, feeling a rush of emotions. Ally, what are you doing here? She came closer, grabbing a chair and sitting by the bedside. I was visiting a business associate and I saw your name on the board. What happened? I took a deep breath. Well, it's a long story. Basically years of stress and, well, Eric. Her smile vanished. Eric? Your husband? Yes, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I've tried for so long to make it work, but it's been a nightmare. His emotional abuse, his family, I'm barely holding on. Ally leaned back in her chair, assessing me. That doesn't sound like the Grace I knew. The Grace I knew was a powerhouse. My eyes welled up with tears. I don't feel like a powerhouse anymore. Well, she said firmly, it's never too late to change that. How serious is your health? The baby's stable for now, I explained, but I need to avoid stress. And Eric's not making that easy, is he? She asked, already knowing the answer. No, he isn't. Ally nodded thoughtfully. Grace, what if I told you that you don't have to go back to that life? I can help you start over. Her words felt like a lifeline. What do you mean? I have an apartment downtown, Ally said. It's empty and you can stay there rent-free. It's a fresh start. My mind raced. Wouldn't it be too much trouble? Not at all, Ally assured me. You focus on your health and the baby. We can take it from there. The relief was overwhelming, but realistic worries clouded my mind. Eric would never let me go easily. What about Eric? Ally's face turned serious. We'll deal with him. For now, you need to get better. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts. I know someone who specializes in family law. He can help you with whatever you need to do next. Each word she spoke felt like another piece of armor being placed around me. For the first time in months, I felt something akin to hope. Why are you doing this for me, Ally? We've been through a lot, Grace, she replied. You've always been there for me. Now it's my turn to help you. And I can't stand seeing you like this. Her offer was more than just a place to stay. It was a chance to rebuild my life. Thank you, Ally. I don't know what to say. Just say you'll take care of yourself, she said, squeezing my hand. And if you need anything at all, you call me. The conversation with Ally left me with a renewed sense of purpose. As she left to make a few calls, I leaned back against the pillows. I couldn't change the past, but maybe, just maybe, I could shape a better future. I had much to think about, but one thing was clear. I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. I had Ally, and with her support, I might just find a way to reclaim my life and protect my baby. A few days after being discharged from the hospital, I found myself in Ally's downtown apartment. It was small but warm and cozy, a world apart from the cold, tension-filled atmosphere of my home with Eric. I settled into the couch, feeling a strange combination of relief and anxiety. Ally bustled around, unpacking groceries she had brought. You need to rest, Grace. Let me handle this. Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you, I said sincerely. You'll do just fine, she replied with a reassuring smile. We need to talk, though, about the plan. The seriousness in her tone made my heart beat faster. What do we need to do? Ally handed me a slip of paper. This is the contact information for a great family lawyer I know. His name is Mark Jensen. He's got a reputation for handling messy divorces. I took the paper, feeling its weight. This was a significant step. When should I call him? Ally looked at me, her eyes fierce. The sooner, the better. Eric isn't going to let you go easily. You need legal protection. I nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. You're right. I'll call him tomorrow. The next day, as planned, I dialed the number on the paper. Mark's assistant answered, and soon I was connected to the lawyer himself. Grace, I've been briefed by Ally about your situation, Mark said, his voice calm and professional. I want you to know that you have options. I don't want a drawn-out fight, I stammered, fear creeping into my voice. Understandable, he replied, but we need to ensure you and your baby are safe. Document everything, every threat, every act of aggression. I shivered, the memories flooding back. Okay, I'll do that. We'll also file for a restraining order if necessary, Mark continued, and I'll guide you through the divorce process. You're not alone, Grace. After hanging up, I felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Days turned into weeks, and I slowly settled into a semblance of a new routine. Ally visited often, and her daughter Hannah dropped by with thoughtful gifts for the baby. One evening, I decided to open up to Hannah about Eric. Eric's not who you think he is, I began cautiously. Hannah frowned, her eyes narrowing. What do you mean? I took a deep breath. He's been emotionally abusive. His family too. I can't live like that anymore. Hannah's face hardened. I work with him, you know. He's not exactly kind there either, but I never knew it was this bad. I nodded, feeling a bond forming. I'm glad you know now. Hannah's eyes flashed with determination. I can keep an eye on him, let you know if he's planning anything. Thank you. That would mean a lot, I said, feeling a surge of gratitude. Over time, Hannah's updates about Eric became a crucial part of my strategy. She reported his growing frustration at work, his dismissive attitude towards colleagues, and the whispers of a possible demotion due to his behavior. Each piece of information was another brick in the wall I was building to protect myself. One afternoon, I received a call from Mark. Grace, I filed the initial divorce papers. Eric will be served soon. Be prepared for his reaction. My heart pounded. What should I expect? He'll likely be angry, but remember, you're doing this for your safety and your baby's future. Stay strong, Mark counseled. Ally arrived shortly after, sitting beside me on the couch. Whatever happens next, you have support. We're in this together. I squeezed her hand, feeling the truth in her words. The battle was far from over, but I was no longer the same scared woman in the hospital. I was stronger now, surrounded by people who believed in me. As I held my growing belly, I whispered, "We're going to be okay. We have to be." In that moment, I knew I had already made the most pivotal move towards reclaiming my life. The road ahead was daunting, but I was ready to face it, step by cautious step, surrounded by newfound allies and an unyielding resolve. I was at my weekly checkup at the hospital, waiting for Dr. Collins when the door burst open. Eric stormed in, his eyes wild and angry. He hadn't made contact since the divorce papers were served. I had hoped he'd stay away, but deep down I knew better. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Grace?" he barked, marching up to the examination chair, his face inches from mine. "You think you can just walk out and take my child with you?" My heart pounded in my chest. "Eric, please, calm down. This is a hospital." "Calm down?" he shouted, his voice echoing in the small room. "You're trying to ruin my life." Before I could respond, Dr. Collins entered, eyes wide. "Excuse me, sir. You can't barge in here like this." Eric turned on her, finger pointing. "This is between me and my wife." I stood up, facing him. "No, Eric. It's about me and my baby, and you need to leave." His eyes narrowed, his face contorting with rage. "You think you can do this? You think you can just leave me and everything will be fine?" Suddenly, the door swung open again. Hannah stepped in, glaring at Eric. "Back off, Eric." "What the hell are you doing here?" Eric spat, his anger shifting to her. Hannah crossed her arms. "Protecting Grace. If you don't leave right now, I'll call the police." Eric's face turned red with fury. "You're just as deluded as she is. This was a mistake from the start." "Eric, get out," I said, my voice quivering but firm. "I've hired a lawyer. We're getting a divorce." He looked at me, stunned for a moment, then laughed bitterly. "You'll come crawling back once this fantasy of yours crumbles." Hannah stepped closer to Eric, her voice dangerously low. "Get out, now!" Eric finally seemed to grasp the seriousness of the situation. He glanced between us, his teeth clenched in anger. "You'll regret this, Grace." As he stormed out, slamming the door behind him, I sank back into the chair, shaking. Hannah sat beside me, placing a comforting hand on my arm. "You did the right thing, Grace." Dr. Collins nodded, her face a mask of concern. "Do you want me to call security? Make sure he doesn't come back?" I shook my head, trying to steady my breath. "No, it's okay. He's gone for now." Hannah looked at me, her eyes soft with sympathy. "Are you all right?" I managed a nod. "I think so. Thank you, Hannah." "We're in this together, remember?" she said, squeezing my hand. Dr. Collins finished the checkup, assuring me that the baby was fine. But the encounter with Eric left a lingering tension in the air. As Hannah and I left the hospital, she turned to me. "Now's the time to stand firm. Don't let him intimidate you." "I know," I said, my voice more confident than I felt. "I can't go back. Not now." Hannah smiled, a fierce glint in her eyes. "And you won't. We'll make sure of it." As we got into the car, a new determination settled over me. Eric's reaction didn't surprise me, but it did remind me of just how far I'd come and how much farther I still had to go. The road ahead was uncertain, but I wasn't walking it alone. With Hannah, Ally, and the support of my new allies, I felt a flicker of hope. The fight for my freedom had only just begun, but with every step, I grew stronger, more resolved. I was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that this time I had the strength and support to stand my ground. It had been a week since Eric's outburst at the hospital, and I had finally started to feel a semblance of peace in Allie's apartment. My morning was quiet until my phone buzzed with a call from Allie. "Grace, turn on the local news," she said, her voice urgent. I fumbled for the remote, switching on the TV just in time to see Eric's face plastered on the screen. Local businessman Eric Green faces allegations of workplace harassment and creating a hostile environment. Reliable sources indicate a demotion is imminent, the reporter explained. My heart raced. I could hardly believe what I was hearing, but a sense of vindication washed over me. Allie's voice interrupted my thoughts. "You see that? He's getting what he deserves." "How did this happen?" I asked, still in shock. "Hannah, she gathered evidence, reported it. She knew the right people to make sure it didn't get swept under the rug," Allie explained. Just as I hung up, Hannah walked through the door, a look of triumph on her face. "Saw the news?" "I did. I don't know how to thank you," I said, voice thick with emotion. "Don't thank me yet. Eric's not going down without a fight," Hannah replied, her face turning serious. We sat on the couch, the TV now muted. "I've arranged for extra security at your building. Until the restraining order is finalized, we can't be too careful," she said. The thought of Eric trying to retaliate sent shivers down my spine. "Do you really think he'll try something?" Hannah nodded. "I wouldn't put it past him. But you're not alone. We've got your back." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation, but also the strength of my support system. I'm ready for whatever comes. Hannah's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it, frowning. "It's him. He's been calling, leaving threats." I grabbed her wrist. "What kind of threats?" She looked at me, eyes filled with concern. "Saying he'll make sure you regret leaving him. He's desperate, Grace." I closed my eyes, anger replacing my fear. "Let him try. I'm done being scared of him." The next few days were tense. Everywhere I went, I felt the shadow of Eric lurking, but I refused to let it control me. Ally and Hannah were relentless in their support, staying close and checking in frequently. One evening, Mark called, his tone somber. "Grace, we need to talk. Eric's lawyer reached out. He's going to fight the divorce hard, especially for custody." Of course he would. What do? We prepare, gather all evidence of his abuse, his threats. We build your case solid, Mark advised. I nodded, the determination in his voice bolstering my resolve. I'll do whatever it takes. Weeks turned into a blur of preparations and cautious living. Eric's demotion became official, and rumors swirled about his troubles at the workplace. Hannah's intel kept me informed, making sure I stayed a step ahead. Finally, the day came for the divorce hearing. Standing outside the courtroom, my heart pounded. Ally held my hand, her presence a steadying force. "You've got this, Grace. Show them the strong woman you are," she whispered. As we walked into the courtroom, Eric's glare bore into me. He looked disheveled, his arrogant demeanor now marred by desperation. I stood tall, ready to face him. The proceedings were arduous, but Mark was relentless, presenting every piece of evidence we had meticulously collected. Eric's lawyer tried to paint me as unstable and unfit, but the truth was undeniable. At the end of it all, the judge ruled in my favor. Eric's abusive behavior, his threats, the hostile work environment, all weighed too heavily against him. As I walked out, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Eric's defeat was a victory not just for me, but for my unborn child. I had fought, and I had won. But most importantly, I had reclaimed my life, ready to start anew. The day I left the courthouse felt surreal. The fight was over, and I had won. And yet the future felt like an unknown expanse, stretching out before me. I returned to Ally's apartment, my temporary sanctuary, feeling both relieved and uncertain. A few weeks later, I was sitting in Ally's office, now officially part of her team. I was grateful for the job and the chance to rebuild my life. It felt good to use my skills again and to be surrounded by supportive faces. Ally walked in, holding a tiny blue onesie. "For the little guy," she said, handing it to me. I smiled, running my fingers over the soft fabric. "Thank you, Ally. You've done so much for us. Your family, Grace. And speaking of family," she hesitated, then continued, "I want you to meet someone." She led me to a conference room where a man in his mid-40s sat. He smiled warmly as we entered. "Grace, this is John. John, this is Grace." John stood up, extending a hand. "Nice to meet you, Grace. Ally's told me a lot about you." Nice to meet you too, I said, shaking his hand, feeling a bit curious. John is a therapist, Allie explained. I thought it might help to talk. I nodded, feeling a bit overwhelmed but understanding her intention. Thanks, Allie. I'll consider it. As I walked back to my apartment that evening, I felt a mixture of gratitude and doubt. Could I really put all this behind me? Months passed, and my life began to stabilize. I worked hard, focusing on my pregnancy and my new job. Hannah stayed close, her friendship becoming a beacon of light in my chaotic world. One afternoon, Ally called me into her office. Grace, I have an offer for you. What is it? I asked, curious. She handed me a folder, an opportunity to lead a new project, something I think you'll excel in. I opened the folder and scanned the details. It was a challenging project, but also a chance to prove myself once more. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Ally smiled. You deserve this. All right, I said, feeling a surge of excitement. Yes. As I left her office, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Hannah. Can you meet me at the park? I have news. I hurried over, finding her sitting on a bench, looking excited. What's up? She grinned. Eric got fired today. They finally had enough of his behavior. A flood of emotions swirled inside me, but mostly relief. Wow. I don't even know what to say. Hannah laughed. Just breathe, Grace. Karma's doing its job. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking and laughing, a sense of closure settling over me. That night, as I lay in bed, feeling my baby's kicks, I finally felt at peace. Eric was out of my life, and a new chapter was beginning. I whispered, "We're going to be okay, little one." The months rolled by, and soon it was time. I went into labor late one night, and Ally rushed me to the hospital. The delivery was intense, but the moment I held my son in my arms, everything else faded away. You did it, Ally whispered, tears in her eyes. No, we did it, I corrected, feeling the weight of our journey. As I cradled my son, I realized that the darkest moments of my life had led me to this point. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving, surrounded by people who loved and believed in me. In the following days, I took up Allie on her suggestion to meet John for therapy. It helped me to process everything I'd been through and to rebuild my confidence. When I returned to work, Ally officially offered me the role of project lead. I accepted, feeling ready to take on the world. And so, surrounded by a new family of friends and allies, I stepped into my new life with determination and a hopeful heart. My son and I were ready for whatever came next, knowing we had already overcome the hardest battles. We were ready to face the future together. Mom, can we go to Aunt Rose's cabin this summer? I miss the animals and the open fields, Ellie said, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. I glanced at her from the kitchen sink, wiped my hands on a towel, and smiled. Of course, sweetheart. We'll go as soon as school is out. Ellie beamed, her face lighting up the room. Derek, my husband, sat at the dining table, scrolling through his phone. He barely looked up. Can't you two ever stay home? This cabin obsession is ridiculous. Derek, it's just a few weeks. Ellie loves it there, and so do I said, my voice calm but firm. Ellie, undeterred by her father's lack of enthusiasm, joined in. Yes, I can't wait to help Aunt Rose with the animals again. Derek sighed, tapping incessantly on his phone. Well, don't expect me to join. I've got too much work. Projects don't manage themselves. Fine, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. We'll manage without you. His eyes finally met mine, a flicker of frustration surfacing. Just make sure you stay reachable. I don't want the same issue as last time. I nodded, turning back to Ellie. Start packing your things, kiddo. We leave Saturday morning. Ellie dashed out of the room, her excitement palpable. Derek pushed his chair back noisily, the legs scraping against the floor. Anyway, I'm heading out. Got a late meeting, he muttered, picking up his briefcase. Still clutching the towel, I watched him walk towards the door. Don't wait up, he added before leaving without a second glance. The door clicked shut, leaving a silence that felt heavier than it should have. Saturday arrived swiftly. The drive to Rose's cabin was long but peaceful. Ellie sang along to her favorite songs as we navigated through winding roads and lush forests. When we finally pulled up to the cabin, Rose was already outside, waving enthusiastically. Aunt Rose, Ellie hollered, leaping out of the car and sprinting towards her. Rose caught her in a big hug, laughing heartily. Look at you, you've grown since I last saw you, Rose exclaimed, ruffling Ellie's hair. I joined them, giving Rose a tight hug. It's good to be here, I admitted, breathing in the crisp mountain air. Come on in. Maxwell's inside making lunch, Rose said, guiding us towards the door. Inside, the cabin smelled like home. Fresh bread, herbs, and a hint of something sweet. Maxwell, Rose's husband, greeted us with his apron on, brandishing a spatula like a knight with his sword. Ladies, welcome back. Ready for some homemade lasagna? He asked, grinning widely. As we settled in, I felt a sense of peace wash over me, the opposite of the tension back at home. Ellie quickly got busy helping Rose feed the animals while I unpacked. That evening, we all sat around the dinner table, the warm glow of the cabin's light casting cozy shadows. Ellie chatted with Rose and Maxwell about school, her friends, and excitement for summer. Rose glanced at me, her eyes silently asking how things were. I gave her a small nod, indicating we'd talk later. Later that night, while Ellie slept soundly in the loft, Rose and I sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the cool night air. So, how's Derek? Rose asked cautiously. Working as usual, I replied, taking a sip from my mug. Things aren't great, Rose. He's distant, always working or on his phone. Rose sighed. I see. And you? How are you holding up? One day at a time, I said, forcing a smile. But being here helps. It's like a breath of fresh air after years of suffocation. Rose reached over and squeezed my hand. Remember, you always have us. This place is as much yours as it is ours. The weight of her words settled over me, filling me with a sense of hope and strength I hadn't felt in a while. Watching the stars twinkle above, I allowed myself to imagine a future, one where Ellie and I found true happiness, even if that meant breaking away from Derek's oppressive indifference. Sunday morning at the cabin started with the sounds of roosters crowing and cows mooing. Ellie was already up and about, helping Rose with the morning chores. I could hear her giggles drifting through the open window as I slowly woke up, appreciating the quiet bustle of the farm. I grabbed a cup of coffee and walked outside to join them. Ellie was brushing one of the horses, her face aglow with happiness. Rose gave me a knowing smile from the chicken coop. Morning, sis. Ready to dive into farm life? She teased, scattering feed for the clucking chickens. I'm ready, I answered, taking a sip of my coffee and feeling more at peace than I had in months. Entering the barn, I noticed the walls covered with old family photos and memorabilia. One picture showed Rose and me as kids, sitting on the same horse Ellie was now brushing. This place was full of history and life, everything my suburban home wasn't. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with a message from Derek. Where are the files I asked for? This is urgent. I replied quickly, hands trembling slightly. I sent them last night. Did you check your email? His reply came swiftly. Check again. They're not there. Why can't you do anything, right? Rose must have seen the tension on my face. She walked over, wiping her hands on her jeans. Is it Derek? Yeah, he's on about work, as usual. I sighed, pocketing my phone. Rose raised an eyebrow. He should know you're on break. Doesn't he try to grasp family time at all? I shook my head, feeling a knot tighten in my chest. Let's not talk about him right now. What's next on our farm to-do list? By the afternoon, Maxwell and Ellie had convinced me to join them in the fields to check on the crops. I watched as Ellie ran happily between the rows, her hair catching the golden light. This was what freedom felt like. Maxwell handed me a basket. Think you can handle picking tomatoes? I think I can manage, I replied with a smile, bending down to start picking the ripe, red fruits. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed again, but this time I ignored it, focusing instead on the weight of the tomatoes in my hand and the richness of the soil beneath my feet. Later that day, Derek called. His voice was sharp, cutting through the serenity of the farm like a knife. Why didn't you respond to my texts? What's so important there that you can't manage a simple email? We're busy here, Derek. It's good for Ellie to be outside, you know? I answered, trying to keep my tone even. She needs stability, not to be dragged off to the middle of nowhere, he retorted. I turned away from the house, looking out at the rolling fields. She's stable here, happier than she's been in a long time. A heavy silence hung on the line before Derek spoke again, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Well, enjoy playing farmer. Don't count on me rescuing you when this little fantasy falls apart. As the call ended, I felt a wave of emotion swell inside me. Anger, frustration, and a fierce protectiveness towards Ellie and our time at the cabin. Rose came up behind me, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. Hey, Everything okay? I forced a smile. Yeah, just Derek being Derek. Rose nodded knowingly. He'll never understand this life, but that's his loss, not ours. Looking around at the calm and beauty surrounding us, I realized Rose was right. Derek might never get it, but that wasn't my problem anymore. Here in the mountains, I felt a sense of clarity and strength. A place where our lives could be rebuilt, one simple, fulfilling day at a time. We had been at Rose's cabin for a little over a week when Ellie came rushing in with wide eyes. Mom, I saw a fox near the chicken coop. He was trying to get in. Rose looked up from the kitchen table, concern etched on her face. A fox? That's not good. We need to secure the coop better. Ellie nodded earnestly. Can we build something to protect the chickens? Rose smiled. Sure thing. We can make a stronger fence and set up some lights to scare it away. I was getting coffee when an idea hit me. Actually, I read about a new eco-friendly project at work. It uses renewable energy to create deterrents for predators. Maybe we could apply that to the farm. Really, Mom? That sounds cool. Ellie's eyes sparkled with renewed excitement. Rose got up, intrigued. Tell me more about it. I explained the concept, feeling a surge of enthusiasm. It's an ecotech project. It's solar-powered lights and sounds to keep predators away without harming them. I could talk to my boss and see if we could test it out here. Maxwell chimed in from the doorway. Sounds like a great idea. Anything to keep the chickens safe and maybe even make things more sustainable around here. A few days later, I broached the project idea with my boss during a video call. I was thinking maybe we could pilot our ecotech project at my sister's farm. It's perfect for testing renewable energy solutions. My boss, a middle-aged man with a kind face, nodded thoughtfully. That's an interesting proposal, Hannah. If it works, it could be a great case study. Go ahead and draft a plan, and we'll review it. I felt a jolt of excitement as I hung up the call. Ellie had overheard the conversation and came running. Mom, are we really going to help Aunt Rose with your project? Yes, Ellie. If it gets approved, it'll be a great help to the farm. That night, I couldn't help but share the news with Derek, hoping for a small sign of encouragement. I talked to my boss about the eco project. He's interested. We might get to pilot it here. Derek snorted. You're really planning to dig in the dirt now? How ambitious. I clenched my teeth, trying to keep calm. It's not about dirt. It's about making a difference, using what I know to help my family. He scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. Just make sure you don't mess it up. I can't have you falling behind at work because of this ridiculous farm fantasy. I hung up, feeling a mix of anger and determination. Derek's words stung, but they also fueled my resolve. This project wasn't just about the farm. It was a chance to show him and myself what I was capable of. After that call, Rose found me sitting on the porch, looking out at the darkened fields. Rough conversation? I nodded. Derek doesn't believe I can do it, but I need to prove him wrong for Ellie's sake and mine. Rose sat down beside me, her presence comforting. You've got this, Hannah. Whatever you need, we're here to support you. Hearing those words gave me the strength to push forward. I went back inside, ready to start drafting a detailed plan for the ecotech project. As the days went by, I poured myself into the proposal, detailing every step and potential outcome. Each part of the plan felt like one more way to break free from Derek's toxic grip, to create a better future for Ellie and me. Finally, I submitted the plan to my boss. Now, all that was left was to wait for approval, but deep down, I knew I was already moving forward. Here at the cabin, we had started something real, something that could change everything. The sun was setting when Ellie wandered into the living room, her face thoughtful. Mom, I saw Daddy with a lady today. I glanced up from my laptop, my heart skipping a beat. What do you mean, sweetie? While we were driving back from town, he was at a cafe with a lady. They were holding hands. The room seemed to close in around me. Rose, sitting nearby, caught my eye. She looked as shocked as I felt. Did you recognize her? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Ellie shook her head. No, but they looked very friendly. I nodded slowly, masking my emotions. Thanks for telling me, Ellie. Matt, why don't you go finish your homework? Once Ellie had left the room, Rose leaned in, concerned. What do you think is going on, Hannah? I exhaled deeply. I don't know, but it's time I found out for sure. The next day, I decided to call a private investigator. The idea of an affair had tormented me before, but Ellie's observation pushed me to act. I listed all the details I knew, feeling a mix of dread and determination. As days went by, I fell into a routine at the cabin, masking my anxiety with work on the eco project. Then the investigator called. "Hannah, I have some information. Derek's been meeting a woman regularly. I have photos and messages." My stomach churned, but I steadied myself. "Send me everything." The evidence came through email, a series of incriminating photos, clearly showing Derek and a woman at various places. My hands shook as I clicked on the messages, reading his flirtatious and deceitful words. With a deep breath, I called Derek. "We need to talk." He sighed loudly. "What now, Hannah?" "I know about her. I've seen the messages and the photos." There was a pause before he responded, aggravation dripping from his voice. "So what? Was it your little detective act that uncovered this? You were never here anyway, always off playing farmer." I clenched my fists, the anger building. "I was here for our daughter and our family. You're the one who shirked responsibility." His laugh was cold and unfeeling. "Responsibility, right? Look, don't pretend you're some saint. Enjoy your cabin life while it lasts." I could hear the contempt in his words, but it only steeled my resolve. "Derek, I'm done. I deserve better. Ellie deserves better. I'm starting divorce proceedings." Silence lingered before he spoke, voice rigid with controlled rage. "Fine, do whatever you think you have to, but don't expect this to be easy." Hanging up, I felt a strange relief wash over me. It was time to move forward, free from his deceit and toxic presence. I found Rose in the garden, her hands deep in the soil. "How did it go?" she asked, wiping dirt off her hands. "I told him it's over," I replied, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "I'm going to start the proceedings. It's time, for me and for Ellie." Rose stood and hugged me. "Good for you, Hannah. We'll do this together." As the days passed, I started gathering everything needed for the legal battle ahead. The cabin felt more like home with each passing day, a place where Ellie and I could build a new life, one honest step at a time. With support from Rose and Maxwell, I contacted a lawyer to begin the divorce process. The road ahead was daunting, but for the first time in a long time, I felt empowered. Our new beginning was within reach, firmly rooted in the love and strength of family. I stepped into the lawyer's office, my heart pounding. A young assistant guided me to a sleek conference room where a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a confident smile greeted me. "Ms. Anderson, I'm Karen Mitchell. Please, sit down," she said, extending her hand. Shaking her hand, I sat down. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice." Karen leaned forward, her demeanor professional yet warm. "Let's get straight to it. You've decided to file for divorce. Tell me everything." I recounted the recent events, culminating with Derek's blatant admission of infidelity. Karen took notes, nodding occasionally. "We need to gather all possible evidence of his misconduct. This will strengthen your case, especially concerning alimony and child support." A sudden thought struck me. Derek's former colleague, Karen, might help. She's openly despised him since he mishandled a project that cost her a promotion. Karen arched an eyebrow. "Do you think she'd testify against him?" "I believe she would. She's got no love lost for Derek." Karen smiled. "Good. I'll contact her." Leaving the office, I felt the first flickers of hope. I was taking steps, concrete steps, towards a better future for Ellie and me. The sense of forward movement was empowering. Back at the cabin, Ellie met me at the door. "Mom, how did it go?" I knelt down, hugging her tightly. "We're making progress, Ellie. We're going to be okay." A few days later, Karen, Derek's former colleague, agreed to meet us at a local cafe. She was a tall woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, her eyes sharp and assessing. "So, Derek finally screwed up enough for you to leave him, huh?" Karen said, sipping her coffee. I nodded, feeling a pang of hurt at the bluntness. "He's been having an affair. I need to prove his irresponsibility, especially financially." Karen leaned in slightly. "Believe me, I've got dirt on Derek. He's been fudging accounts and embezzling funds." My stomach turned. "Can you prove this?" Karen gave a wicked smile. "I've got emails, transaction records, the works. I've been saving them for an occasion exactly like this." Later, I shared the news with Rose and Maxwell at the dinner table. Ellie was at her friend's house, so it was just the three of us. "Karen's going to help. She has proof Derek's been embezzling," I said. Rose's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "Embezzling? That changes everything." Maxwell nodded. If he's guilty of fraud, we've got leverage. He can't brush this off or bully you into submission. Armed with Karen's evidence, I felt more prepared than ever. The next week dragged by in a blur of legal preparations and emotional turmoil. Finally, the day of confrontation arrived. Derek showed up at the lawyer's office, his expression a mix of anger and defiance. "What's this about, Hannah? More baseless accusations?" I stood tall, Karen by my side. "No, Derek, this is about your fraudulent activities and how you've wronged our family." The color drained from his face, disbelief and rage battling for dominance. "You're bluffing," he spat. Karen laid out the evidence calmly, piece by piece. Derek's facade crumbled as he realized the gravity of his situation. "This is insane. You can't trust her. She's lying." Karen looked unperturbed. "The court will decide that, Mr. Anderson." I watched Derek, his composure shattering, revealing the scared, selfish man beneath. "What do you want?" he finally muttered, beaten. "I want a fair divorce settlement, full custody of Ellie, and alimony," I stated firmly. Derek's eyes were cold, but he knew there was no escape. "Fine, take what you want, just get out of my life." As I walked out of the office, a mixture of relief and resolve flooded me. Rose and Maxwell were waiting outside, their faces alight with anticipation. "It's over," I told them, my voice steady. "We've won the first battle." Rose hugged me tightly. "You did it, Hannah. Now it's time for the next chapter." Maxwell clapped me on the back. "Onwards and upwards, sister." With their support and the evidence in our favor, the future began to glow with promise. It was time to build a new life, one where Ellie and I could truly thrive. The courtroom buzzed with hushed whispers as I took my seat next to Karen. Derek's attorney, a grizzled man with a stern face, shuffled papers at the opposite table. Derek sat beside him, glaring at me with a mixture of anger and desperation. Karen leaned over, her voice low but reassuring. "Stick to the facts. We have all the evidence we need." The judge, a stern-looking man with glasses perched on the tip of his nose, banged his gavel. "Court is now in session for the case of Anderson versus Anderson." Derek's lawyer stood up first, his voice smooth and rehearsed. "Your Honor, we contend that Mrs. Anderson is exaggerating claims of misconduct to gain an unfair advantage in the divorce settlement." I felt a surge of anger, but Karen squeezed my arm subtly, grounding me. When it was our turn, Karen presented the evidence methodically, starting with Derek's infidelity. "Your Honor, here are messages proving Mr. Anderson's affair," she said, handing the judge a folder. The judge glanced over the papers, then looked at Derek. "Mr. Anderson, do you deny the validity of these messages?" Derek remained silent, his face a mix of defiance and fear. Next, Karen presented the evidence of embezzlement. She displayed emails, bank statements, and transaction records, each a nail in Derek's coffin. This evidence clearly highlights Mr. Anderson's fraudulent activities, which have compromised not only his marriage, but also his professional integrity, Karen stated firmly. Derek's lawyer attempted to object, but the judge silenced him with a wave of his hand. "Mr. Anderson, do you have any defense for these claims?" Derek stood up, his facade crumbling. "These are lies, fabrications to ruin me." The judge's gaze was cold. "The evidence speaks loud and clear, Mr. Anderson." Karen shot me a supportive glance. It was time for the final blow. Karen stood up. "Your Honor, we ask for full custody of Ellie Anderson, alimony, and that Mr. Anderson be held accountable for his fraudulent actions." Derek exploded. "This is a setup. She's turning my daughter against me." The judge banged his gavel again, bringing order to the chaos. "Mr. Anderson, enough. I will review the evidence and issue a ruling shortly." We left the courtroom to wait for the judge's decision, my nerves stretched thin. Rose and Maxwell arrived, bringing comfort and moral support. Finally, the judge called us back in. As everyone settled, he looked straight at Derek, his voice firm. "Based on the overwhelming evidence of infidelity and financial misconduct, this court grants Mrs. Anderson full custody of Ellie Anderson, as well as alimony and child support. Furthermore, I am referring Mr. Anderson's fraudulent activities to the appropriate authorities." Derek's face turned white, then red with fury. "This is a witch hunt," he screamed. "You can't do this to me." Karen stood up, unflappable. "Justice has been served, Mr. Anderson." The judge banged his gavel one last time. "Court is adjourned." As we filed out, a weight lifted off my shoulders. Rose hugged me tightly, her eyes filled with tears of relief. "It's finally over, Hannah. You did it." Ellie, who had been waiting with Maxwell in the hallway, ran up to me. "Mom, are we really away from Dad now?" I picked her up, holding her close. "Yes, sweetheart, we're free." Maxwell clapped me on the back. "Time to start that new chapter, huh?" I nodded, my heart swelling with hope. With Derek facing legal consequences and having lost the fight, the path was clear. Karen shook my hand warmly. "You were strong through this, Hannah. Now, go make that new life you deserve." As we left the courthouse, I felt a sense of renewal. The battle had been fierce, but we had emerged victorious. The road ahead was bright and open, ready for us to walk it together as a family. Weeks after the court's ruling, the news about Derek's financial misconduct spread like wildfire. His once commanding presence at work was reduced to whispers and suspicious glances. One afternoon, Karen called me. "Hannah, have you seen the news?" "No, why?" I asked, sensing something significant. "Derek's been fired. The board found out about his embezzlement. They've terminated his contract." I felt a rush of satisfaction. "He's really facing the consequences now," Karen chuckled. "It's far from over. He's being investigated by the authorities for fraud. He won't be getting away with anything." At home, Rose and I couldn't help but feel a sense of justice. Later that evening, Ellie and I sat on the porch, the sky painted with the hues of sunset. "Mom, will Daddy be okay?" she asked softly. I looked at her, choosing my words carefully. "He made bad choices, sweetie. Now he has to face the music. But you and we're safe, and that's what matters." News outlets soon picked up Derek's story, his name plastered with accusations and scandal. One day Karen called again, sounding triumphant. "Hannah, the judge ruled that Derek must pay full child support and alimony. They've frozen his assets to cover it." I felt a mix of relief and triumph. "Thank you, Karen. You've been incredible through all this." "My pleasure, Hannah. Now go enjoy your life." The following weeks brought more signs of Derek's downfall. He tried to contact me several times, but I ignored his calls. One evening, I finally picked up, anticipating his outrage. "You've ruined my life, Hannah." Derek's voice was a blend of anger and desperation. "You did this to yourself, Derek," I replied evenly. "You made your choices. Now live with them." "Do you think you're so perfect? You're just hiding on that stupid farm, pretending everything's okay," he sneered. I took a deep breath, holding back a retort. "Ellie and I are happy, Derek. We're moving on, and you should do the same." Slamming the phone down, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Derek's words couldn't hurt us anymore. A few days later, Rose came rushing into the cabin with the newspaper. "Hannah, look at this!" The headline read, "Former executive faces jail time for fraud." The article detailed Derek's impending court dates and the serious charges against him. Maxwell clapped his hands, grinning. "Looks like karma finally caught up with him." I nodded, feeling a deep sense of closure. "It's over, really over." Ellie joined us, her face curious. "What's going on?" I hugged her tightly. "Nothing to worry about, sweetie. Just some old news. We're free now." Ellie's smile reaffirmed what I felt inside. The shadow Derek had cast over our lives was gone. We could now embrace the future without looking back. As Derek's life unraveled, ours blossomed. The ecotech project at the farm began to thrive, bringing new energy and purpose. Ellie adapted to her new school, making friends and finding joy in the simple pleasures of one evening. As we finished dinner, Ellie looked at me with excitement. "Mom, can we invite my friends over to see the farm? They'd love it here." I smiled, my heart swelling with pride. "Of course, Ellie. This is our home, and we should share it." Rose and Maxwell nodded in agreement, their faces reflecting the sentiment. With each passing day, the cabin felt more like home, a place of healing and growth. As the sun set on our past struggles, I knew we were ready to embrace whatever future awaited us, brimming with newfound strength and hope. The final court ruling had made it clear Derek had lost everything. Seeing the news, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication, but my focus now was entirely on building a new life for Ellie and myself. We officially moved into Rose's cabin. The small space felt cozy and welcoming, filled with the smell of fresh bread and the sound of laughter, elements drastically missing from our old home. Ellie thrived, her once anxious demeanor replaced by a radiant smile. One crisp morning, as we sipped our coffee on the porch, Rose turned to me. "Guess what? The ecotech project got mentioned in the local paper again. They're calling it a model for sustainable farming." That's fantastic news, Rose, I exclaimed, feeling immense pride and relief. That afternoon, Ellie had her friends over. They fed the chickens, ran through the fields, and took turns on the tire swing. Their laughter echoed, filling the space with youthful joy. Mom, I love it here, Ellie said, throwing her arms around me. I never want to leave. I'm glad, Ellie. This is our home now, I replied, hugging her back tightly. Meanwhile, Derek took every opportunity to try disrupting our peace. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, my phone buzzed with a message. Derek again? Rose asked, seeing my face tense. Let's see. I opened the message. Derek had somehow found out about our success with the Ecotech project. Enjoy your little success while it lasts. You're nothing without me, his text read. I rolled my eyes, showing it to Rose and Maxwell. He's desperate, Maxwell remarked. Ignore him. Agreed. Rose said, he's just trying to rattle you. I nodded, blocking his number. He can't touch us now. We're stronger than he thinks. Over the next months, Derek's situation worsened. He lost his house and friends, his reputation in tatters. Occasionally, I'd hear bits of news about his struggles, but I remained focused on our new life. His downfall was a testament to the karma that had finally caught up with him. One morning, we were interrupted by an unexpected knock at the door. Karen stood there, looking pleased. Good news, she announced. Derek's been sentenced to prison for fraud. The chapter is truly closed. A rush of relief swept over me. Thank you, Karen, for everything. You earned this, Hannah, she replied. Now, live your best life. As Karen left, Rose clapped her hands, gathering everyone outside. This calls for a celebration. We spent the day enjoying an impromptu barbecue, Ellie playing with her friends and Maxwell strumming his guitar. The air was filled with laughter and music, a sharp contrast to the struggle and pain we'd endured. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ellie snuggled up beside me, her eyes reflecting the twinkling stars. Mom, I'm so glad we're here. I feel free, she said softly. I kissed her forehead. Me too, Ellie. We're exactly where we belong. That night, as everyone settled into the cabin, I took a moment to step outside. The sky was clear and the stars shone brightly. I breathed in the fresh mountain air, feeling the weight of the past lift completely. Our new beginning wasn't without its challenges, but it was filled with hope and endless possibilities. Here, surrounded by family and nature, we had found our sanctuary. And as Derek faced the consequences of his actions, I felt a deep sense of justice. This life, this freedom, was the karma he could never touch. For Ellie and me, it was a testament to our resilience and a promise of a brighter future. I'll be staying here from now on. Get used to it. I nearly dropped my purse. Lorraine's voice cut through the air like a bad joke fallen flat. What? Since when? Kevin stood to the side, shifting on his feet, avoiding my eyes. He tried to muster a weak smile. Mom needed a place, Elena. She'll stay with us for a while. I could feel my blood boiling. A place? Kevin, we didn't discuss this. Lorraine rolled her eyes, a smirk flickering across her face. There's no need to raise your voice. It's family business. I glanced at Kevin, searching for some sign of solidarity. He simply shrugged, looking anywhere but at me. She doesn't have anywhere else to go, he muttered. Anger rose in my chest. So you just decide this without asking me? Kevin sighed, walking past me to grab a can of soda from the kitchen. Look, let's not make this a huge deal, okay? It's temporary. Lorraine settled herself on the couch, flipping through a magazine like she owned the place. I clenched my fists, resisting the urge to scream. Temporary? And how long is temporary exactly? Kevin opened the soda, taking a sip. We'll figure it out. She's family, Elena. I turned away, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. Nothing about this felt right. The house I had worked so hard to make our home was now invaded without a second thought. I glanced back at Kevin, hoping for a glimmer of understanding. Kevin, I need to talk to you, alone. He finally looked at me, his face a mix of annoyance and fatigue. Fine, he said, putting down his drink. Let's talk. We walked to the backyard, where the evening air did little to cool my anger. You can't just bring her here without any discussion, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Kevin rubbed the back of his neck. Elena, it's not that simple. She's my mother. I didn't want to sound heartless, but I felt cornered. I understand, but this is our home too. We're supposed to make these decisions together. He gave me a tired look. I thought you'd understand. The sting of those words cut deep. Kevin, that's not fair. I'm trying to understand, but you can't expect me to accept this without talking about it. He shrugged again, as if that single gesture could dissolve my frustration. Look, just give it time. She won't be a problem. I glared at him, unable to fathom his nonchalance. Won't be a problem. She's already taken over the living room. Kevin threw his hands up in surrender. I can't throw her out, Elena. That's all I'm saying. With that, he walked back inside, leaving me fuming in the backyard. The sinking realization dawned on me. My voice didn't matter. Kevin had made up his mind, and Lorraine had dug her heels in. As I stood there, I took a deep breath, my determination solidifying. I would not let this go uncontested. Stepping back inside, I shot a glare at Lorraine. She met my eyes with a cold smile. This is not over, I whispered, mainly to myself. The house, my sanctuary, had become a battleground, and the war had just begun. I can't believe this is happening, I muttered to myself as I left for work the next morning. My best friend Sandra called just as I pulled into the parking lot. Elena, how was your trip? She asked cheerfully. It was fine, but I came back to a nightmare. What do you mean? Her voice grew serious. Kevin's mom moved in, just like that. No discussion, no warning, I said, biting back my frustration. Sandra sighed. You've got to be kidding me. Didn't he even talk to you about it? Nope. It was all decided while I was gone. Sandra was quiet for a moment. You need to lay down some boundaries, Elena. This isn't okay. I know, I said, parking the car and grabbing my bag. It's just complicated. I get it. Just remember, you don't have to put up with this forever, she said, trying to reassure me. Entering the office, I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting back home. Memories flooded in about when Kevin and I first met at this very office. Kevin, the charming graphic designer, always had a way of making everyone laugh. Our romance had been quick and intense. We married after just a year of dating, certain we could handle anything together. Then Lorraine revealed her true colors. Sweet and supportive before the wedding, she turned critical and manipulative once the rings were on our fingers. Kevin, forever the peacemaker, never stood up to her. I'll never forget the first time she openly disapproved of me. Are you sure you can handle Kevin's work hours, Elena? Maybe you should rethink this career of yours, she said, smirking as if she was genuinely concerned. Of course, Kevin and I manage just fine, I had replied, masking my irritation. Kevin had shrugged the comment off, claiming she meant no harm, but the seeds of doubt she planted grew each day. Returning home that evening, I found Lorraine rearranging the kitchen. What are you doing? I couldn't hide my annoyance. Just making it more practical. You had it all wrong, she replied nonchalantly. I clenched my jaw, taking a deep breath. I like it the way it is. Lorraine's voice dripped with false sweetness. Oh, sweetie, you'll see it's better this way. Stepping into the living room, I saw Kevin on his laptop. Kevin, we need to talk, now. He looked up, clearly sensing the tension. What is it? Lorraine is taking over the house. We need to set some boundaries. Kevin sighed, rubbing his temples. Elena, can't you just try and get along with her? It's hard for her, too. I stared at him in disbelief. Are you kidding me? She's acting like this place is hers. She's just trying to help, he replied weakly. Help? By undermining everything I do? I snapped. Kevin stood up, frustration lining his face. Why do you always have to blow things out of proportion? Rare anger bubbled inside me. Blow things out of proportion? You're seriously siding with her? He threw his hands up. I'm not taking sides, I just want some peace. Furious, I stormed out to the backyard. My home felt like a stranger's house, my voice unheard, my feelings disregarded. But I knew deep down this wasn't living. As the night fell, I steeled myself. This wouldn't be swept under the rug. Something had to change, and I would make sure of it. Kevin's passive nature had pushed me to the edge, but I wouldn't fall off. Not yet. Not without a fight. The days blurred into a nightmare. I barely recognized my own house. Lorraine's presence was overpowering. She critiqued everything I did, from how I cooked to how I decorated. Kevin stayed silent through it all, brushing off my concerns like dust on a shelf. One morning, as I sipped my coffee, Lorraine strutted into the kitchen. Elena, I noticed you've been spending a lot on groceries. Maybe you should cut back a bit. I stared at her, biting my tongue until it nearly bled. Lorraine, we buy what we need. She smirked, shaking her head. I'd manage this household differently, but I guess it's your call. Just as I opened my mouth to retort, Kevin walked in. I turned to him. "Kevin, do you hear this?" He looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. "Mom's just trying to help." I slammed my cup down, coffee spilling. "Trying to help by undermining me?" Kevin sighed, the lines on his face deepening. "Why do you always have to make a scene?" Lorraine's eyes twinkled with satisfaction. She had him wrapped around her finger. Frustrated, I stormed out of the kitchen. The next day, while I was at work, I got a text from Kevin. "We need to talk tonight." Anxiety gnawed at me. When I got home, Lorraine's smug glance followed me as I walked into the living room. Kevin was sitting there, looking stern. "Elena, Mom needs money. I've already given her some, but she needs more." My jaw dropped. "She needs more. We have bills, Kevin." He rubbed his forehead. "I know, but she's family. She's in a tough spot." I turned to Lorraine, who was lounging on the couch, looking unbothered. "Can't she find a job or—" Lorraine cut me off. "I've done my fair share of work. It's time for my son to take care of me." My patience snapped. "Kevin, this is not right or fair. You're putting our future at risk." Kevin's face turned red. "She's my mother, Elena. She comes first." Tears stung my eyes as I realized where his loyalty lay. "What about us, Kevin? What about our life?" He stood up, clenching his fists. "Maybe you should think about being more supportive." I left the living room, heart pounding with anger and betrayal. The conversation kept replaying in my mind. Kevin's unwavering support for Lorraine and his blatant disregard for our needs. Sandra called that evening. "How are you holding up?" "Not well," I admitted. "Lorraine wants money now, and Kevin's ready to give it to her." Sandra's voice brimmed with outrage. "That's insane. You need to put your foot down, Elena." "It's not that easy," I sighed. "He won't listen to me." "Then make him listen. You can't keep sacrificing your happiness." Her words echoed in my mind long after we hung up. The next morning I confronted Kevin again. "We need to talk about finances. This has to stop." Kevin rolled his eyes. "We'll be fine." Desperation gripped me. "Kevin, you're jeopardizing everything we've worked for." He shrugged. "She's family. You're the one being unreasonable." Anger surged through me. This is my home too. I will not be pushed aside. Walking away from that conversation, I knew things had to change. I couldn't let Lorraine dictate our lives. And if Kevin refused to stand by me, I'd find a way to reclaim my power, no matter the cost. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight for what was rightfully ours. The escalation had only just begun. I came home late from work one evening, hoping for some semblance of peace. Instead, I walked into Lorraine and Kevin in the middle of a heated discussion. "It's not done right, Kevin," Lorraine was saying. "Elena doesn't know how to manage this house properly." Kevin looked up as I entered, his expression shifting from annoyance to exasperation. "Mom thinks the house isn't clean enough," he said, as if that were the biggest problem we had. Lorraine turned to me, hands on her hips. "Elena, couldn't you at least try to keep this place decent?" I dropped my bag on the floor, barely containing my fury. "I have a full-time job, Lorraine. I can't spend every minute cleaning." Lorraine huffed. "When I was your age, I managed just fine." That was the last straw. "This isn't about cleaning. You just want to control everything." Kevin stepped between us, his voice rising. "Elena, calm down. Mom's just trying to help." "Help? By criticizing everything I do? This is my home, Kevin. Our home." Lorraine scoffed. "You're overreacting. Maybe if you learned some respect." Before she could finish, I cut her off. "Respect? You moved in unannounced, rearranged my kitchen, demanded money, and now you're criticizing how I maintain my home. How is that respectful?" Kevin's face turned red with frustration. "Elena, why can't you see that she's just looking out for us?" I could have screamed from the hopelessness of it all. "Looking out for us? She's making me feel like a guest in my own house." Lorraine threw her hands in the air. "If you're that unhappy, maybe you should leave." I stared at her, stunned. Turning to Kevin, I waited for him to defend me, but he remained silent. My heart sank. "Is that what you want too, Kevin? For me to leave?" He avoided my gaze, his silence louder than any words. Tears threatened, but I held them back. "Fine. If you want me to leave, just say it." Kevin finally spoke, but his words hit like a brick. "Maybe you need to learn some respect for family, or leave if you can't handle basic family expectations." The air was thick with tension as I turned on my heel and stormed out of the house. I needed space, air, anything but the walls that felt like they were closing in on me. Sandra's comforting voice was the only thing that made sense as I paced outside, phone pressed to my ear. "He actually said that?" she gasped. "Yes, basically told me to leave," I whispered, the hurt palpable. "Elena, you deserve better than this. If he won't see that, then maybe it's time to rethink things." Her words rang true, but they also scared me. Could I really walk away from 10 years with Kevin, from the home we built? When I finally came back inside, Kevin and Lorraine's voices could still be heard, low and conspiratorial. They didn't notice me slip upstairs, my mind swirling with conflicting thoughts. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. I knew I couldn't go on like this. Kevin's spinelessness and Lorraine's incessant meddling were driving me to the edge. Sleep didn't come easily that night, but as exhaustion finally took over, one thing was clear. I needed to stand up for myself. I couldn't let them trample over my life without consequence. The battle wasn't just Lorraine's intrusion, it was about reclaiming my own dignity and worth. Morning broke with a sense of grim determination. I had a conference trip coming up, and it felt like the last chance to find some perspective. Kevin was already at the kitchen table when I came downstairs. "We need to talk," he said, as if last night hadn't been a breaking point. "Not now, Kevin. I've got a plane to catch," I said, moving past him. He grabbed my arm gently. "We'll work this out, I promise." I looked at him, searching for sincerity. "We'll see about that." As I left the house, the weight of the impending decisions hung heavy, but I knew one thing for sure: change was coming, one way or another. The conference trip was a welcome escape. For a few days I immersed myself in work, trying to forget about the chaos at home. But as soon as I landed back at the airport, reality crashed back in. I got a text from Kevin. "We need to talk when you get home." Dread settled in my stomach as I walked through the door. Lorraine was in the kitchen, moving pots and pans around as if she could further assert her control over our space. "Welcome back," Lorraine said with a smirk. "Did you enjoy your trip?" "Spare me," I muttered, too tired to engage. Kevin was pacing in the living room. When he saw me, he stopped. "We need to talk now, Elena." I dropped my bags. "Fine, talk." He glanced uneasily at Lorraine before speaking. "Mom and I have been discussing our situation. We think you need to make some changes." "Changes?" I crossed my arms, ready for the next blow. Lorraine interjected. "You need to learn to respect family, and clearly, you're struggling with that." I felt like I was being gaslit. Respect goes both ways, Lorraine. You've done nothing but disrespect me since you got here." Kevin stepped in defensively. "Mom's just trying to help us make this work." I couldn't hold back anymore. "Kevin, are you even listening to yourself? She's tearing us apart." Lorraine put on her most innocent face. "Oh, please, you're just blowing things out of proportion," I snapped. "You're manipulating Kevin and trying to control our lives. What exactly is your endgame here?" Kevin's face turned pale. "Elena, stop. We're supposed to be a family. A family that respects each other," I shot back. "And right now I feel like I've been completely disrespected and disregarded." Kevin's face contorted with frustration. "Maybe you need to spend some time away to clear your head." I was stunned. "Do you even hear what you're saying? You want me to leave my own home?" Lorraine smirked, clearly enjoying the show. "Maybe a little time apart would do you both some good." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Kevin broke it. "Maybe she's right. I think it's best if you take some time to cool off." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of betrayal. If I leave, I'm not coming back until things change. Kevin looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "Do what you need to do, Elena." I turned, grabbing my bags, and walked out the door. It wasn't until I was outside that the tears came. As heart-wrenching as it was also liberating. For too long I had tolerated being second to Lorraine's manipulations. Sandra was at her door before I even rang the bell. "Elena, what's happened now?" "Kevin wants me to leave," I managed between sobs. He sided with Lorraine again. Sandra pulled me into a comforting hug. "You've done the right thing. You deserve better." As days turned into a week, I settled into Sandra's spare bedroom. The sting of Kevin's betrayal was sharp, but the time away also gave me clarity. I began consulting with Mark, a trusted lawyer, discussing my options. During one of our meetings, Mark looked up from his papers. "You know, Elena, the house is legally yours." I blinked, processing his words. "What do you mean?" Kevin never updated the deed after you purchased it. Legally, you hold the title. A spark of hope flickered. So I could. Yes, Mark confirmed. You have the power here. Use it wisely. Armed with this knowledge, I prepared for the next battle. Kevin and Lorraine needed a wake-up call, and I was more than ready to give it to them. My time of feeling powerless was over. It was time to reclaim what was rightfully mine. I returned home with a resolve I hadn't felt in years. As I walked through the front door, the silence struck me. It was clear Lorraine and Kevin knew something was up. I found them both in the living room, Kevin on the couch, Lorraine in the armchair. Both turned to face me as I entered. Kevin spoke first, his voice betraying his nervousness. Elena, where have you been? I didn't waste any time. Kevin, Lorraine, sit down. We need to talk. Lorraine's eyes narrowed. About what? Think you can come in here and start making demands? I ignored her, focusing on Kevin. This ends now, Kevin. Lorraine's constant meddling, the financial drain, everything. Kevin's brows furrowed. What are you saying? I'm saying this situation is unbearable. Lorraine's presence and your constant support of her over our marriage is unacceptable. Lorraine stood up, her face a mask of feigned innocence. Oh, I see. So now it's all my fault? Every part of it, I stated bluntly. I've tried to be reasonable, but you've taken over our home, criticized me constantly, and pushed me to the breaking point. Kevin sighed deeply. Elena, we've been over this. She's family. I took a deep breath. Well, here's the thing, Kevin. The house is in my name. Legally, I own this place. Both Kevin and Lorraine froze, their faces pale. What? Kevin muttered, disbelief painting his features. You heard me, and with that, I have the final say on who stays and who goes. Lorraine scoffed, trying to regain her composure. You wouldn't dare. I looked straight at Kevin. If you want to stay in this marriage, Lorraine needs to go. Now. Kevin stammered. Elena, you can't just... Yes, I can, I interrupted. This is my home, and I'm done being pushed around. Lorraine's eyes were on fire. You ungrateful little... Enough, I shouted. Leave, now. Kevin stood up, trying to placate. Elena, can't we discuss this? No, Kevin. I have tried to discuss, to compromise, but you both have taken advantage of my patience. He glanced at his mother, despair clouding his eyes. Mom, maybe it's best if you find somewhere else to stay for a while. Lorraine's face twisted in rage. What? You're kicking me out? Kevin looked down, avoiding her gaze. Maybe just for a little while, until things calm down. She turned to me, venom in her voice. You'll regret this. I met her look with defiance. No, Lorraine, I think this is exactly what I need to do. Kevin's shoulders slumped as Lorraine stormed off to pack her things. He finally looked at me, desperation in his eyes. Elena, I cut him off. Kevin, I love you. But your blind allegiance to your mother has pushed us to this breaking point. Things need to change, or we're over. Lorraine brushed past us with her bags, shooting daggers with her eyes. This isn't the end, Elena. Remember that. I didn't flinch. Goodbye, Lorraine. After she slammed the door, the house fell into an eerie silence. Kevin and I stood there, the distance between us growing. This wasn't going to be fixed overnight. If Kevin couldn't adjust, I knew I'd have to walk away for good. For now, though, a heavy weight lifted from my shoulders. The battle wasn't completely won, but the most reinforcing battle had been, and I felt stronger for it. The next steps were uncertain, but I was ready to face them head-on. Kevin was unusually quiet in the days following Lorraine's departure. Tension hung in the air like a storm about to break. His silence was heavy, his movements slow, and it was clear he was struggling to process everything. One evening, while we were having dinner, he finally spoke up. Elena, I never wanted it to get this bad. I looked at him, wanting to believe there was genuine regret. Kevin, it's not just about wanting or not wanting. It's about actions and consequences. You've allowed your mother to disrespect me for years. He sighed, pushing his food around on his plate. I know, but I didn't know how to stop her. By standing up to her, Kevin, by putting our marriage first, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. You're right, he admitted, sadly. I've been a coward. The admission felt like a small victory, but I wasn't about to let him off easy. Kevin, I need you to understand that things have to change. If they don't, we won't survive this. He looked up, his eyes pleading. I'll do whatever it takes, Elena. Just tell me what to do. I took a deep breath. We need professional help, counseling, and you need to rebuild the trust that's been shattered. Kevin nodded, slowly. I'll make an appointment tomorrow. The next few days were filled with cold, practical coexistence. We barely spoke outside of necessity. I needed space to heal, and Kevin seemed to need time to regain his footing. Then, another bombshell hit. Lorraine started calling, leaving messages. Kevin ignored them at first, but one evening he played them all at once, his face pale. Lorraine's voice was shrill and desperate. "Kevin, I need you to come here. Things are bad. I don't know what to do." Kevin turned to me, eyes wide with helplessness. "She's in trouble, Alina?" I crossed my arms, feeling my resolve harden. "She's been in trouble of her own making. She dug this hole, Kevin." "I know, but she's still my mother," he said, his voice shaking. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar sting of frustration. "If you go to her now, Kevin, you're undoing any progress we've made." He froze, torn between guilt and duty. "But if I don't go, what kind of son am I?" "One who finally sets boundaries. One who respects his wife," I replied. Kevin's shoulders drooped. "What do you want me to do?" "This is a test for you, Kevin. You need to choose us. If you don't, I'll know where we stand," I said, each word a heavy verdict. Kevin slowly nodded. "All right, I won't go." The next day I consulted Mark again, finalizing some practical matters regarding the house. When I returned home, Kevin was waiting. "I didn't respond to her," he said quietly, "just like you asked." A small part of me felt relief. "That's a start, Kevin. And I made an appointment with the counselor for both of us," he added. I nodded, feeling cautiously optimistic. "Good. We need this." Later, as we sat silently in the living room, Kevin finally broke the quiet. "I regret everything, Elena. Letting her come between us was the worst mistake of my life." I looked at him, sensing some genuine change. "This is your chance to prove it." He reached out, taking my hand. "I promise, Elena, I'll do better." As the days turned into weeks, we attended counseling sessions, slowly working through years of built-up resentment and betrayal. It wasn't easy, and I wasn't sure if Kevin and I would fully recover, but for the first time, there was a glimmer of hope. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that Lorraine wasn't done with her schemes, and I remained vigilant, ready for whatever her next move would be. This battle wasn't over, but I was no longer willing to be a passive participant in my own life. I was prepared to fight for my happiness, no matter the cost. The decision to move out temporarily was my last resort. Kevin and I had made progress in counseling, but I needed a fresh start to clear my mind and regain control. I found a small, furnished apartment a few blocks away, allowing me to maintain some distance while still keeping an eye on the home front. The day I left, Kevin looked distraught. "Elena, I understand why you need to do this, but it feels so final." "It's not forever, Kevin. It's just for now," I said, mustering as much reassurance as I could. "I need space to heal." He nodded, but his eyes were filled with worry. "I'll be here when you're ready." As I settled into my new place, I threw myself into work, excelling at the marketing firm and networking with new clients. One evening, I received a call from Nathan Parker, an old friend who had just launched a startup. "Elena, I've been following your career for a while now. I'd love for you to join my team," he said enthusiastically. Excitement bubbled up. "That sounds amazing, Nathan. Let's meet and discuss it further." Meanwhile, Lorraine's life was unraveling. Rumors reached me through mutual acquaintances. She and Kevin had been forced to move into a rundown apartment, their finances in tatters without my contributions. It seemed karma was catching up to her. Several weeks passed before Kevin called. "Elena, can we meet? I need to talk to you." We met at a small cafe. Kevin looked worn out but sincere. "I've missed you. The house feels empty without you." "I've missed you too," I admitted, though cautiously. "But have things changed?" He sighed deeply. "Lorraine's in over her head. She's been manipulating me for so long, and I finally see it. I've made arrangements for her to move in with a relative out of state." I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Yes," he confirmed. "I want to make things right, Elena. I want us to be happy again." A part of me felt relief, but I also knew I had to protect my heart. "Kevin, it'll take time for me to believe things have truly changed." He nodded understandingly. "I'm willing to wait." As I walked back to my apartment, I mulled over our conversation. Was it possible Kevin had really changed? Only time would tell. The next day, I met with Nathan. The startup's energy was infectious, and I accepted his offer to join the team as their head of marketing. It was a fresh, exciting challenge and a chance to build something new. Months flew by. Work was fulfilling, and Kevin and I maintained cautious communication. Finally, one afternoon, I received the news I'd been expecting. Lorraine had moved out of state. Kevin called me later, his voice hopeful. "The house is ours again, Elena? Can we start over?" I hesitated a moment before answering. "Yes, Kevin. We can give it another try." Moving back into the house felt surreal. It was as if a dark cloud had lifted, and the space was filled with possibilities once more. Kevin worked hard to rebuild trust, and the counseling sessions became a solid foundation for our new beginning. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Kevin turned to me. "Thank you for giving us another chance, Elena. I won't let you down." Looking at him, I saw a genuine change and commitment in his eyes. "I believe you, Kevin. Let's make the most of this." Life gradually became stable and fulfilling again. My career at Nathan's startup soared, and Kevin and I rediscovered our love and partnership. Lorraine's absence was a blessing that allowed us to focus on us without the constant undercurrent of manipulation. Occasionally, I'd hear whispers about Lorraine struggling in her new living situation. She had burned many bridges and found herself isolated and vulnerable. It may have been karma's way of balancing the scales. As time went on, Kevin and I thrived, stronger and more resilient than ever. The journey had been long and painful, but the light at the end was worth the battle. Now our lives felt rooted in mutual respect and genuine love, standing tall amidst the trials we'd conquered together. "Ellie, if you can't keep it together, maybe you shouldn't come home at all." The words echoed in my mind as I sat at my desk, staring blankly at the computer screen. The phone call from Officer Daniels still reverberated through my head, dulling my senses. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Parker, but there's been an accident. Your parents, they didn't survive." I hung up, choking on my tears. My parents, on their way to the Grand Canyon for their annual road trip, gone in an instant. I fumbled for my phone, dialing my husband, Mike. "Mike, I need you. My parents." My voice cracked. "Ellie, I'm in the middle of a meeting. Can't this wait?" Mike's irritation pierced through the line. "They're dead, Mike. My parents are dead," I sobbed, clutching the phone like a lifeline. Silence. Then, with a sigh, "Ellie, if you can't keep it together, maybe you shouldn't come home at all." He hung up. Stunned, I dropped the phone. The hum of the office felt distant as I rushed out, barely noticing my colleagues' concerned glances. The drive home was a blur. When I arrived, Mike was already there, standing in the kitchen. "Ellie, you're blowing this out of proportion," he said, barely looking up. "My parents just died," I shouted. "How can you be so cold?" "Look, it's not my fault. You need to handle this better." He snapped back, turning away to avoid my gaze. I retreated to our bedroom, tears streaming down my face. Memories of my parents flooded in. Thanksgivings, road trips, their laughter. Everything was shattered. I felt alone, misunderstood, even in my own home. Later that night, after putting our daughter Lizzie to bed, I approached Mike again. "We need to talk about the funeral." "I have a big project due. I might not make it," he said flatly, tapping on his laptop. "Can't you see what I'm going through?" My voice trembled, anger mixing with grief. "Ellie, I'm tired. We'll talk tomorrow." And with that, he walked out, leaving me alone with my pain. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, heard their voices. By morning, I was numb. I typed out the obituary, made funeral arrangements, all while Lizzie asked why Grandma and Grandpa weren't coming back. I couldn't find the words to explain. Days passed, blending into a haze. The neighborhood sympathy offered little comfort. Everyone's questions, their pitying looks, made it worse, and Mike's indifference was a knife twisting deeper into my heart. The day of the funeral, I dressed Lizzie in her best dress. "Why isn't Daddy coming?" she asked quietly. "He has work, sweetheart," I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady for her sake. At the funeral, standing beside the caskets, I felt utterly hollow. Friends and family offered condolences, but I barely registered their presence. Cheryl, Mike's mother, approached me with a look of forced sympathy. "Such a tragedy," she said, her voice dripping with insincerity. "Have you thought about the inheritance? It might help with expenses." I stared at her, disbelief blending with fury. "My parents just died. How can you talk about money?" "I'm just being practical, dear. Someone has to be," she replied, patting my shoulder in a mock display of comfort. Her words left me even more broken. Cheryl never cared about anyone but herself and her son. That night, I sat in the dark, my resolve hardening. My parents deserved justice, and I wouldn't let Mike's apathy or his mother's greed tarnish their memory. It was time to face the harsh reality of my life and take control. As the moonlight filtered through the window, I made a silent vow. Things would change. I would not let their deaths be in vain, and I would not remain trapped in this loveless, uncaring marriage any longer. The days leading up to the funeral were a blur of paperwork and phone calls. I spent every moment arranging services, choosing flowers, coordinating with the funeral home. Mike remained distant, claiming work obligations kept him busy. The weight of his indifference crushed me. One evening, I caught him slinking into the house late. "Where were you?" I demanded. "Work. Had to stay late," he replied, avoiding eye contact. "Late again? Every night this week, Mike?" My voice cracked with frustration. "Ellie, I told you, it's a big project," he snapped. He brushed past me and headed to our bedroom, closing the door behind him. I stood there feeling more alone than ever. The night before the funeral, Cheryl showed up unannounced. She breezed into the living room, her perfume overwhelming. "Ellie, how are you holding up?" she asked, her tone insincere. "Doing what I can," I replied, keeping my eyes on the carpet. Cheryl's gaze shifted to the closed bedroom door. "Where's Mike?" "Still working," I said through gritted teeth. "That man works too much," she tutted, then turned her attention back to me. "So have you decided what's happening with their estate?" I clenched my fists. "Cheryl, it's not the time." "Don't be so emotional, Ellie. This is about practicality," she said, her voice cool. "My parents are gone, Cheryl. I can't think about money right now," I replied, barely holding back tears. "Well, you need to. Mike and Lizzie need security," she continued, as if she wasn't intruding on my grief. "Mike and Lizzie are not my immediate concern," I snapped, standing my ground. She huffed, clearly displeased. "Fine, Ellie, but don't take too long. This is important for the family." As soon as she left, I collapsed onto the couch, the weight of everything suffocating me. Mike's absence, Cheryl's greed, the loss of my parents. It was too much. I needed to stay strong for Lizzie, but my resolve was slipping. The funeral day arrived, gray and somber. I dressed in black, every motion robotic. Lizzie clung to my side, sensing the gravity of the day, even if she didn't fully understand. As we approached the church, Mike's car was nowhere to be seen. He had promised to meet us there, but the empty space felt like a slap. Inside, the service began. The minister spoke kind words about my parents, but all I could think about was Mike's empty seat. When it was my turn to speak, I choked back tears just looking at the sea of sympathetic faces. Afterward, at the reception, Cheryl approached again. "You need to think about Lizzie's future," she said, cornering me by the refreshment table. "I'm trying to get through today," I said, my voice breaking. "Ellie, you're the mother now. You have responsibilities," she lectured, her eyes hard. "I'm well aware of my responsibilities, Cheryl," I replied sharply, barely containing my anger. Her face twisted in disapproval. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she muttered before walking away. Standing there, surrounded by people, yet utterly alone, something inside me hardened. Mike's coldness, Cheryl's incessant greed, these weren't just inconveniences. They were part of a larger problem, a toxic burden I didn't need to carry. I looked down at Lizzie, her innocent face looking up at me. For her sake, I knew I had to act. I couldn't rely on Mike or endure Cheryl's manipulation any longer. My parents' death had shattered my world. Now I had to rebuild it, stronger for both of us. It was time to make some changes, and I knew exactly where to start. As days turned into weeks after the funeral, I noticed Mike's absences becoming more frequent and his excuses thinner. Each late-night return chipped away at the fragile remnants of our marriage. One evening, while Lizzie was engrossed in her homework, I cornered him in the kitchen. "Where have you been, Mike?" I asked, my voice steady. "Work, Ellie." "I told you," he replied, avoiding eye contact as he rummaged through the fridge. "Work? Really?" I crossed my arms. "You smell like cheap perfume." He froze, then turned to face me, his expression hardening. "You're imagining things. Maybe you should get help." I scoffed, fury boiling up. "Don't turn this on me. I know something's going on." "You're paranoid," he snapped, grabbing a soda and slamming the fridge door shut. I watched him walk away, a decision forming in my mind. If he wouldn't come clean, I'd find out myself. I had to know the truth for my and Lizzie's sake. The next day I made a call to a private investigator. "Hello, Mr. Harris. I need to find out what my husband's up to," I explained, feeling a mix of desperation and resolve. Mr. Harris was efficient. Within a week he had gathered enough evidence to fill a small folder. We met in a nondescript cafe, him sliding the folder across the table. "You were right to suspect, Mrs. Parker. He's been seeing a woman named Kim Blackwood. She works at a local bar." My heart pounded as I flipped through the photographs. Mike with Kim, laughing, holding hands, even kissing in public. Betrayal stabbed at me, but I forced myself to remain calm. "Thank you, Mr. Harris," I said, my voice steady. "I'll take it from here." That night, I confronted Mike when he finally showed up. "Care to explain these?" I tossed the folder onto the couch. His eyes widened as he saw the contents. "Ellie, I can explain," he stammered. "Explain what? That you've been lying to me? Cheating on me?" My voice rose with each word. "It's not what it looks like," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Really? Because it looks like you've been with her for months," I shot back, my anger giving me strength. "Work's been stressful, Ellie. You've been so distant." "Don't you dare blame this on me," I interrupted, my body shaking with rage. "You betrayed our family. You betrayed Lizzie." He opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. "I want a divorce, Mike, and you're going to pay for what you've done." His face turned from guilt to anger. "You think you can just take Lizzie away from me? I'll fight you on this." "I have more than enough evidence. Any court would side with me," I said, standing tall. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about our daughter, and she deserves better." Mike stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I stood there, breathing heavily, the house silent except for the ticking of the clock. Lizzie was asleep upstairs, unaware of the storm that had just erupted. The next morning, I began gathering more evidence, financial records, text messages, anything that would secure my case. Each piece of proof was another step toward freeing myself and protecting Lizzie. I contacted a lawyer, determined to proceed strategically. "We have a strong case," the lawyer assured me. "With the evidence you've provided, we can ensure full custody and a hefty alimony. Your husband won't stand a chance." Hearing those words bolstered my resolve. This wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about reclaiming my life and safeguarding Lizzie's future. I was ready to fight, and I wouldn't back down until justice was served. I sat in the lawyer's office, the divorce papers in front of me. My hands felt steady as I signed each page. My attorney, Mrs. Grant, gave a nod of approval. "We've got a strong case, Ellie. Present these to Mike and he'll realize he can't win." Leaving the office, I felt a strange mix of determination and dread. I drove straight home, needing to confront Mike immediately, armed with the legal documents and unshakable resolve. He was sitting on the couch, watching TV, seemingly oblivious to the storm brewing. "Mike, we need to talk," I said, standing in front of him, blocking the screen. He looked up, irritated. "What now, Ellie?" I tossed the papers onto his lap. "These. Sign them." He glanced at them, his face slowly turning red as he realized what they were. "Divorce papers? You've got to be kidding me." He stood up, towering over me. "I'm done, Mike. I want out. And I'm taking Lizzie with me," I replied, not backing down. His face twisted in anger. "You think you can just walk away and take my daughter? I'll fight this. I'll ruin you, Ellie. You'll never get custody." "I've got plenty of evidence to prove you're unfit," I shot back. "Your affair, your neglect, I'll make sure the court sees it all." He laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "You really think you can beat me? I'll drag you through the mud. I'll make sure everyone knows you're the unstable one. You won't have a leg to stand on." "Do what you want, Mike. I'm not backing down. Lizzie deserves better than this toxic environment." "You think you're some kind of hero?" "You're nothing without me, Ellie," he sneered. I felt a surge of anger. "I'm stronger than you think, and I'll prove it. Sign the papers, Mike, or I'll see you in court." For a moment we stood there, glaring at each other. Finally, he snatched the papers and threw them to the ground. "This isn't over, Ellie. Not by a long shot." I picked up the papers, my resolve strengthened by his threats. "We'll see about that." Over the next week, Mike's threats became more intense. He called me at all hours, leaving angry voicemails. He showed up at my job, trying to cause scenes, but my coworkers helped keep him at bay. It was exhausting, but I refused to let him see me falter. One evening, I heard him on the phone with his mother. "She's trying to ruin me, Mom. I need to find a way to take Lizzie away from her. Cheryl's voice came through, sharp and manipulative. We'll fight this together, Mike. She won't stand a chance against us. I knew they'd stop at nothing to hurt me, to take Lizzie from me. But I wouldn't let them. I had the support of my lawyer, my friends, and my undeniable evidence. I had to be strong for Lizzie. I called Mrs. Grant. We need to proceed. His threats are escalating. We'll move quickly, she assured me. Stay strong, Ellie. We've got this. The next morning, Mike received an official notice to appear in court. His fury was evident as he stormed into the house, waving the papers. You think you can win this? Yes, I replied simply, because it's the truth. This is war, Ellie, he spat, throwing the papers at my feet. So be it, I said, standing firm. For Lizzie, for my parents' memory, and for myself, I would not back down. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight with everything I had. I sat at a small table in the corner of the cafe, my heart beating fast. I clutched the divorce papers in my hand, waiting for Mike to arrive. The sounds of steaming milk and clinking cups filled the air, but I was focused on the door. When Mike finally walked in, his eyes locked onto me with a look of sheer contempt. He sat down roughly, not bothering with pleasantries. What do you want, Ellie? I want this over with. You need to sign these, I said, pushing the papers towards him. He glanced at them, his jaw tightening. I told you, I'm not signing anything. You think you can just waltz in here and dictate everything? You had your chance, Mike. Now it's about protecting Lizzie and moving on. He sneered. You're delusional if you think you're getting any money from me. And Lizzie? Over my dead body. As he spoke, his boss Derek entered the cafe. Derek was heading to the counter when he recognized Mike and turned towards us, encouraged by visible intrigue. Mike, what's going on here? Derek asked, eyes shifting between us. Mike's face turned pale. Nothing, sir. Just a family matter. Looks like more than that, Derek said, his gaze narrowing at the sight of the papers on the table. Ellie, Mike hissed, attempting to maintain his composure. This isn't the place. I seized the moment. Actually, it is. Mike, you've been lying and cheating for months. You've neglected your family and your job. Derek raised an eyebrow. Is this true? Mike stumbled over his words. It's complicated. She's blowing things out of proportion. No, Mike, I shot back. You've been spending company time with your mistress, not on work projects. Derek's expression shifted from curiosity to cold anger. Is this true, Mike? Sir, I can explain. Derek cut him off. Save it. I've had my suspicions. Consider this your last day at the office. Mike's face turned red, his anger barely contained. You can't do that. I just did, Derek replied sharply, turning and walking away. I watched Mike crumble before me, his career crashing as he realized there was no escaping this time. The cafe's ambient noise returned, but we were in a bubble of silence. You've ruined everything, Mike hissed, his voice shaking with rage. No, Mike, you did that all by yourself, I said, standing up. Mark my words, Ellie. I'm taking you down with me, he said through gritted teeth. Good luck with that, I replied, picking up the papers. As I walked out, I felt a surge of liberation. This battle was far from over, but I'd just won a significant victory. Outside the cafe, I took a deep breath, savoring the fresh air. Mike's downfall had begun, and I was ready to fight for our daughter's future. Every step I took away from that confrontation was another step towards justice, for my parents, for Lizzie, and most importantly, for myself. The courtroom buzzed with low murmurs as I walked in, head held high. Mrs. Grant was beside me, a reassuring presence. Mike sat across the room, his face a mask of anger and defiance. His lawyer, Mr. Jacobs, whispered something into his ear. The judge called for silence. We're here today to consider custody and alimony arrangements for the Parker case, the judge announced. Mrs. Grant stood addressing the court. Your Honor, we have clear evidence of Mr. Parker's infidelity and neglect, both as a husband and father. We request full custody for my client, Mrs. Parker, and appropriate alimony and child support. Mr. Jacobs rose, looking smug. Your Honor, Mr. Parker disputes these accusations. He has been a dedicated father and deserves joint custody at the very least. The judge nodded, flipping through the files. Mrs. Parker, please step forward. I straightened my back as I approached the stand. Can you describe your husband's involvement with your daughter, Lizzie? Mike has been absent, that both physically and emotionally, I began. He's focused on his affair and neglected his responsibilities at home. Lizzie needs stability, which I can provide. Mrs. Grant then presented the evidence: photos, text messages, financial records, all condemning Mike. I saw his face redden as each piece of evidence was displayed. The judge looked over the documents carefully. "It seems clear that Mr. Parker has been preoccupied with his affair," he said, turning to Mike. "Do you have anything to say?" Mike stood, his body rigid. "Your Honor, this is all blown out of proportion. I've provided for my family. Ellie's just trying to ruin me." Mrs. Grant interjected. "Your Honor, Lizzie's well-being is our priority. Mr. Parker's actions have shown he's incapable of being a responsible parent." At that moment, the courtroom doors creaked open and a man walked in. It was Kim's husband, Dave. He approached the judge, holding a stack of papers. "Your Honor, if I may," Dave said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "I, too, have evidence against Mr. Parker and my wife, Kim. Mr. Parker's actions have not only hurt his family, but mine as well." The judge allowed him to submit the documents. Dave outlined how their affair had affected his family, detailing financial discrepancies and deceit. The courtroom listened intently, the atmosphere thick with tension. After a thorough review, the judge spoke. "Mr. Parker, given the overwhelming evidence, I rule in favor of Mrs. Parker. She is granted full custody of Lizzie and significant alimony and child support." Mike's face registered defeat. "This isn't fair," he muttered under his breath. The judge continued, "Furthermore, these financial records suggest potential fraud. This will be investigated separately." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. As the proceedings concluded, Mike shot me a venomous look. "This isn't over, Ellie." I met his gaze, unflinching. "Yes, it is, Mike. Yes, it is." Outside the courtroom, Dave approached me. "I'm sorry for everything. Let's make sure they pay for what they've done." "Agreed," I said, feeling a sense of camaraderie. As I walked to my car, I called Mrs. Grant. "Thank you for everything. What's next?" "We'll finalize the paperwork, and then we'll look into those hidden accounts your investigator found," she replied. I nodded, determination burning within me. This battle was almost won, but the war wasn't over. Mike's deceit would lead to his downfall, and I was prepared for the next fight. With Lizzie by my side, there was nothing that could break me now. The knock on my door was sharp and insistent. I opened it to find a stern-faced detective holding a warrant. "Mrs. Parker, may we come in?" I stepped aside, heart pounding. "What is this about?" The detective nodded to his partner. "We're here to search for documents related to Mr. Parker's offshore accounts. We have reason to believe he's been hiding assets." My mind raced. Mike had lied and cheated, and now his financial deceit was coming to light. "Take whatever you need," I said, leading them to Mike's old office. While the detectives sifted through papers, I called Mrs. Grant. "They're searching the house for evidence of Mike's hidden accounts." "Good," she replied. "This will only strengthen our case. Stay calm and cooperate." As the detectives worked, I found myself outside, watching Lizzie play in the yard with our neighbor's children. She looked so carefree, a stark contrast to the chaos inside. Hours passed before the detective reappeared. "We've found enough to initiate a full investigation. Thank you for your cooperation, Mrs. Parker. You'll be hearing from us soon." After they left, I was overwhelmed with a mix of relief and anticipation. This was another nail in Mike's coffin, another step toward justice. The next morning, I received a call from Derek. "Ellie, I wanted you to hear it from me. Mike's been arrested for fraud. The company's pressing charges." I closed my eyes, absorbing the news. "Thank you for letting me know, Derek." "This was inevitable," he sighed. "He crossed too many lines. Take care, Ellie." Mike's arrest unleashed a media frenzy. Cameras and reporters swarmed our neighborhood, seeking a statement. I kept a low profile, focusing on Lizzie and the life we were rebuilding. One evening, as I tucked Lizzie into bed, she looked up at me with wide eyes. "Mommy, is Daddy coming home?" I brushed her hair gently. "Not for a while, sweetheart, but you have me, and that's all we need right now." She nodded, trusting and innocent. "Okay, Mommy, I love you." "I love you too, Lizzie," I whispered, feeling the weight of my promise. I had to stay strong for her. Days turned into weeks. Mike's world continued to unravel. His assets were frozen, his accounts scrutinized. Cheryl tried to intervene, but her attempts were futile against the mounting evidence. I received a call from Kim one afternoon. "Ellie, it's Kim. Can we talk?" I hesitated, but curiosity and a need for closure prompted me. "Fine, come over." When she arrived, she looked worn. "I'm sorry for everything," she began, her voice shaky. "I didn't realize the extent of Mike's lies. He's ruined my life, too." I studied her, seeing the guilt and regret. "So what do you want from me?" "I just wanted to apologize and offer my support. What he did to both of us is unforgivable." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of solidarity with her. "Thank you, Kim, but Mike's actions have consequences, and we both have to live with that." As she left, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Closure was coming, slowly but surely. Weeks later, the court verdict was in. Mike was found guilty of fraud and embezzlement. He faced years in prison, his reputation shattered, his life in ruins. Cheryl's health declined rapidly, and she moved into a care facility. Mike's network of lies had collapsed entirely. One afternoon, as Lizzie and I were playing in the yard, the sun shining brightly, I realized we had reached a turning point. "Mommy, are we okay now?" Lizzie asked, her innocence refreshing. "We are, Lizzie. We're better than okay," I said, scooping her into my arms. "This is our fresh start." She giggled, her laughter a sweet balm to my weary soul. For the first time in a long while, I felt the stirrings of hope. Our future was bright, untouched by the shadows of the past. Mike's downfall was complete, and in its wake we would rebuild, stronger than ever. The move to California was hectic but liberating. Lizzie and I left the shadows of our old life behind, embracing a fresh start. Our new home, a cozy bungalow bathed in sunshine, felt like hope personified. On the first day at her new school, Lizzie was nervous. "Do you think they'll like me, Mom?" I knelt to her level, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "They'll love you, Lizzie. Just be yourself." We walked into the school together, the hallways bustling with students. Mrs. Thompson, Lizzie's teacher, greeted us warmly. "We're so happy to have Lizzie join us." I watched Lizzie blend into her new classroom, her face lighting up with curiosity and excitement. I left, feeling lighter, hopeful for the first time in a long while. At my new job, the environment was invigorating. I dove into projects, the creativity and challenge renewing my spirit. My coworkers were friendly, and Jack, the head of our team, was especially kind. One afternoon, Jack invited me to lunch. We walked to a nearby cafe, the air filled with the scent of fresh coffee and pastries. "So how are you settling in?" Jack asked, his eyes warm and inviting. "Better than I expected. It's been a rocky year, but I feel like we're finally finding our footing," I replied. Jack nodded, his expression understanding. "New beginnings can be tough, but you seem strong. Lizzie's lucky to have you." "Thanks, Jack. It means a lot," I said, feeling a connection growing. Days turned into weeks. Lizzie thrived at school, making friends and excelling in her classes. Her laughter filled our home, a sweet reminder of our resilience. I found myself looking forward to work, where Jack's presence became a comforting constant. One Friday evening, Jack invited us over for a barbecue. "Bring Lizzie. It'll be fun," he said with a smile. At Jack's house, Lizzie played in the yard with his dog, her laughter echoing through the air. Jack and I stood by the grill, the smell of sizzling burgers making me feel at home. "You've created such a warm place here," I remarked, watching Lizzie chase the dog. "It's important to have a sanctuary," Jack replied, his tone sincere. "Everyone needs a safe place to heal." We sat on the patio, the evening turning cool. Jack turned to me, his expression thoughtful. "Ellie, I've seen the strength it's taken to get where you are. You're incredible." I felt a blush creeping up my cheeks. "It's been a journey, but I couldn't let Mike's actions define us." "He doesn't deserve a second thought," Jack said firmly. "You and Lizzie deserve all the happiness in the world." As the night wrapped around us, I realized how much I had healed. Jack's kindness, Lizzie's laughter, our new life, it was more than I had hoped for. A few weeks later, as Lizzie and I walked along the beach, hand in hand, she looked up at me. "Mommy, do you think Daddy is sorry for what he did?" I paused, looking at the horizon. "Maybe. But what matters now is that we're happy. We're free to be ourselves." She nodded, her eyes bright. "I love our new life." "Me too, Lizzie," I said, squeezing her hand. "Me too." The sun set, casting a golden glow over the waves. I felt a deep sense of peace. Our past was behind us, replaced by a future filled with promise. Mike's deceit and cruelty no longer dictated our lives. We were free, resilient, and ready to embrace whatever came next. The journey had been long and painful, but it led us to this moment of pure, unadulterated happiness. And for that, I was profoundly grateful.